is my portal. There's a thunderstorm right now.
It's the new one?
Yeah, this was brand new. Released yesterday on YouTube. It's still not out on Spotify, I don't think.
Oh, that's excellent.
Is this you playing, Nerdelian?
Yeah.
Oh, what? A fellow musician, this is great.
Yeah.
If you know how to do like collaborative stuff online, that'd be awesome if you could teach me how to do that, because I would love to do it. I just don't know technology that well. Just somewhat ironic, I guess. But
I've done some collaborations online. Say I know how. Made it sort of work, kind of work a couple of times. But yeah, we can talk about that. Maybe mind you, I think Carl likes us to kill a bit of time while she's doing the promotions and descriptions.
So is this
Yeah.
part like streamed?
It's streamed,
Where
but
are
you
we
guys
in the process?
we are streaming, but I'm doing all the descriptions, promotions, and stuff like that.
So
We're going
this is meant
live.
to be like backstage space until it's live, or
It's already live.
okay.
best
You should
being.
announce things like that.
Well, I think there was like a pop-up saying like this is being live streamed.
We're waiting for the crowd to gather. Oh, look at how many people are there! Wow, look at that.
Yeah. Wow. Hi everybody. I think Peter should join. And EM. They always join to watch each other. I really appreciate all. Okay. Protective use of force. Excellent. Chapter 11. So today is an excellent chapter. I love it. Thumbnail. Just uploading our thumbnail. Okay, but the way to do live, actually collaborations, I think we would just, like I've done some with Nerdalian. There are 3 songs at least on YouTube and Spotify. So we would just use Audacity,
Yeah.
kind of record layer by layer and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'll do the last one we did together next in the playlist.
Oh, nice. Screenshots.
Only ever use Audacity for like the actual like track recording, and I use, what is it called, like the free and open source like DAW. It's like, oh, what is it called? I haven't used it in so long. If I could find it.
I think a lot of the big DAWs now have free versions. Like there's a free version of Pro Tools. And I think there's a free version of Ableton, but I might be wrong about that. So yeah, for small projects, you can get a free DAW. I use Reason because it's the one I learned back in the day, and it's a pain in the ass to learn another one.
Friend of mine yesterday, and we were outside, and there were some bird sound. We were near a bunch of trees, and there were just bird sounds going on. It was pretty quiet. So he pulls out a phone. And he's got an app on there to identify nature noises. And the thing that was interesting was it wasn't just trying to do like one bird, like as different birds would call. It was showing like a real-time report and going, oh yeah, that was like the black-crested warbler. Oh, that's a blue, a red-crested whatever. It was kind of, it may or may not have been accurate, but it was impressive to see like a real-time report of like what these different bird calls all were in sequence. Apparently, not so hard anymore.
So that's the collaboration. Took a couple of days. It's Kevin. It's done like that. Nerdalian plays music. I write lyrics, listening to that music, like kind of sort of connect to the vibe of the music. And then there are adjustments, like sending back and forth documents and stuff like that. touch of brain. It's like
Just a
Future
touch.
Man. Have you seen Future Man? Like when she touched his brain. Okay.
Wait. Okay.
Okay, guys, we are actually live streaming, and let's see.
What were we before then?
That liminal space.
That liminal
just messing
space.
around.
We were in a cave,
Relive.
hanging out with Plato.
Plato's outside.
We were
of the cave,
Schrodinger
that's the whole point.
streamers.
Exactly.
Yeah, we only became real when people looked at us. I see.
I was like, I was thinking about that quote: "If the tree falls in the forest, but nobody is there to see it, did it really fall?" And I was like,
Does
"Yes."
it make a sound?
Does it make a sound?
It's not if it fell. If it you started with it fell. Yes, it fell.
If a thing did a thing, did it do that thing?
Oh, hi, Cordell. Cordell is in the audience. Yes. Hi. Okay, let's
You
start.
said Godot?
Cordell.
Oh,
He's at a
Cordell.
poetry thing yesterday.
I thought she was waiting
Yes.
for somebody.
I do. I kind of wait for the general of subjectivity, because he really wanted to do this chapter. But okay, now let's start with that. Welcome everybody to Nonviolent Communication, and today we are reading chapter 11, the protective use of force. So in the room with us on the panel is Nerdalian Plebs, Algernon, Kevin Flowers, and Graham Pong. Welcome, everybody. Okay, let's start. There we go. So, there are two types of force. I mean, you can use it in a different, depending on the implications, why we use it. You can use it protectively or punitively. And when using force might be necessary, it's to protect life or individual rights. There is no opportunity for an actual dialogue, or people don't have willingness to communicate. Immediate danger would not allow for communication, so the urgency. And in order to prevent a bad thing from happening, we might use or resort to using force. Okay. Yeah. Basically, that's the protective use of force. There is not much in the chapter about actual protective use, but Marshall B. Rosenberg proceeds to dedicate the chapter to punitive action, using force to punish people. And it's all about the intention. Why do we do it? Of course, like my own personal note, people can talk themselves into doing it. That's also a thing. They would like go through all sorts of mental gymnastics. But Marshall B. Rosenberg means it linearly. So intention behind using force is either protective or punitive. What do you guys think about that? Nerdalian?
So if I remember correctly, Rosenberg uses two examples of protective force. The one example is a child sort of playing in the street, carelessly running into oncoming traffic and sort of violently grabbing their arm and pulling them back to safety, which may actually hurt their arm a little bit, but it'll hurt a lot less than being hit by a car. So it's an example of protecting the child using force. And then at the end of the chapter, there's an example in a school setting where there's some problem with discipline, and one of the solutions they come up with is to create a classroom for children who aren't in the mood to study or cooperate in class, so that they'll go to their do nothing room. And yeah, I think that was also considered. I don't think he explicitly stated that as a protective use of force, but he was offering that as a way to protect the rights of the students who do want to get work done from the students who don't want to do work, by separating them. And then he took special care to make sure that the do nothing room isn't a punishment room. So sometimes children would ask to go there, and sometimes teachers would ask children to go there, and they put a counseling type, well trained in nonviolent communication, to be there with the children and presumably listen to which of their needs aren't being met, that they feel they can't study or don't want to study or don't want to cooperate. But yeah, I think those are the only two examples. Can't remember any other.
Algernon?
There's a lot of fuzziness in these definitions, and the author conflates a lot of things kind of casually as you go through the text. And so while I don't disagree with a lot of things, I'm like, did you just conflate like the force? You're like, there's places where you're like just hitting somebody, like, all right, I'm gonna agree this is force, but I'm not gonna put an absolute to say like it's never good. And he has that example of grabbing the child for the accident. But if you extend that to like slapping a toddler's wrist as they're reaching for a burning pot, that's a correct action. Like it's a good action, and it will startle the toddler, and they will be upset because they've gotten this sharp rebuke, and that change is intentional and well-founded. So these absolutes of, across the entire spectrum of childhood development, it strike me as difficult. I think it's something to be navigated, not to be struck in an absolute. I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Graham?
I was going to build off of what Algernon said. Is there's definitely some issues that I have with the definitions, and it's like starting with one of them. He doesn't really define force, but he's basically trying to limit it to more or less physical force. And it's not like he's not recognizing there are things like, financial force or emotional force. And it's like, if you didn't. And the other one that I had with him is he basically, what Algernon said, the idea of instructive force, where you're basically, you're setting limits for somebody, a child or somebody else. And in order to like enforce your boundaries, you have to use force if they're violating your boundaries. Whether that's self-protection or not is a different definition. I'm going to tag on that.
Kevin?
Okay, I guess I get to be the resident contrarian. So, and a lot of this is like, okay, so one, I guess I should pick up on Nerdalian's concern about two examples. So he actually has a whole like set of workshops that are actually freely available on YouTube at the moment. And I spent some time going through some of those, and he gives, because someone asked me about this, like, if I have, let's say like a teenager that they're raising, and like, which I think they did, and like, I want to, like remove certain things, like let's say their access to driving, if it might be like, danger to themselves, the property. And he made an interesting distinction in that discussion about like, well, because I think what he's trying to get at is like, it depends about like, it depends on like the cognitive space you're coming from, cognitive also including emotional. Because his point was like, if you're doing that to like somehow like extract revenge or like somehow cause them to suffer and like to repent in this kind of moralistic like mindset, if that's where you're coming from, then he would call that like punitive force. But if you're doing it with this other mindset of like, I'm actually trying to like, protect them from themselves and like, foster their facility for life, he's very much in this mindset of things should be life giving, then it's then it wouldn't be this punitive force. And I think that's what he might be my violence, because he gets into this what I think he's doing, because I've seen this before in other contexts. I think he's doing this rhetorical game where he's like saying words, like that's fucking wrong. That can't be right. Like that just sounds ridiculous. And then in the process of trying to unravel that, it's like he's trying to get you to basically just have a very different mindset. And I don't know if, because I haven't read the other 10 chapters, but he uses this phrase of like jackal, like speaking jackal versus speaking giraffe. I think he picks giraffe because he says that's like, you know, the mammal with like the largest heart or something. But he very much in the workshops, he's trying to get people to actively switch into this other kind of headspace and trying to like get people to ignore what people are saying, which is kind of funny. Like ignore like the content of what they're saying and trying to like figure out what is the underlying like basic human need they're trying to express through that conflict. Anyway, so that's that for now.
So I mean, I read that as kind of two things are in conflict. You're like, this is what force is, and you understand what force is, like physically harming. I'm like, okay, we can work with that. But then when you say, oh, but there's punitive force, and punitive force can be like withholding something that the other person is attracted to, like, you know, withholding access to recreational activity. And he's like, that's punitive force. We have to look at that. And I'm like, that is a big jump to just suddenly call that force. I mean, there's maybe if I disassemble it, it does come down to the same thing. Because like the parent, let's say it was internet access, the parent is like, I pay for it and I can take it away and you can't do anything about it. And that's where like you must obey because it's force. This is where like having the absolutes, I don't think are helpful, because I do think that using carrots and sticks, mostly carrots, and withholding of carrots is super effective, especially in rearing kids.
Yeah, so to just on the point of how withholding can cause a lot of pain, just one very clear example. If someone is a drug addict and you cut off their supplies, they will suffer very strong withdrawal symptoms. And what Kevin made a point about, sometimes he says things that that doesn't sound right. I think that comes down to him trying to have kind of an emotional impact on his audience, and he's willing to skirt across analytical boundaries in order to get the point across. So even in his writing, and I made a similar point last week, he'll use very strong phrases where if you bring a logical analytic mindset to that sentence, it's very easy to prove it wrong. But he's not really catering to the people logically parsing what he's saying. He's trying to move people's hearts, and so to do that, he's willing to speak in imprecise and incorrect ways, technically incorrect ways. And so I think this is one of those examples where maybe his communication was a little unclear. I think even the withholding of something as a means of force can be done from two kinds of intentions. The intention can be to induce suffering because the bastard deserves it, and he would call that punitive force. Or the intention could be, I won't allow you to harm my loved ones, so I'm going to withhold access from you in this way, like minimally withhold you that's necessary to take your ability away to harm my loved ones, which may include you, or it may just be me, like it may be my family or whatever. But that kind of preventing a greater harm by inducing minimal necessary harm is, I think, what he, with that intention specifically, is what he calls protective, and with the intention to cause suffering, he would call punitive.
Suffering is a big window there.
Yeah, I agree with Nordalian here. That basically the intention in the first part, he takes, it's all about the intention of why you're doing a thing. Are you trying to protect them or to make their lives better? That's why you're using the force. Or are you trying to punish them? So intention does kind of differentiate the same action. It can be the same action done with different intention. Basically, further we will move just in diving into all types of punitive action and use of force, just mainly to cause harm to another person, either out of spite or in order for them to do something with force, which is like the opposite of nonviolent communication. Okay, guys.
I was going to say, just a quick comment on that one. I think from my perspective, I don't see it where it's an easy discerning between either intentional use of force or the punitive force versus the protective or instructional. It's usually a combination of the two. And it's a question of how much it is punitive versus instructional or whatever. Tagging.
I think when we say like, should not cause suffering, I think that's too broad, because like, for example, if you withheld internet, you took a kid's phone away, does that cause them to suffer? If a kid's going to say yes, for sure, but maybe their homework's not getting done and their grades are suffering. And so you're like, well, okay, he's suffering there again. Anyway, their grades have been reduced, and your intent as a parent is to help them get a good education. And so you're like, and I judged that you were on that phone too much, and that's part of it. So my punishment is really constructive, even though it's going to cause you suffering. And actually, it's probably good because you should not want to be on that much. So the parent can create any number of justifications and frame it either way there. I mean, they should have good intentions when they do that, not just be like, bad kid, I'm taking away your phone for no reason.
Okay, so if people behave in ways injurious to themselves or others due to some form of ignorance, not understanding the situation, the corrective process should be educational, not punishment, according to NVC. And by ignorance, they mean a lack of awareness of the consequences of your actions, inability to see how needs may be met without injury to others, any harm to others. The belief that we have the right to punish or hurt others because they deserve it. Delusional thinking that involves, for example, hearing a voice that instructs us to hurt others. Okay, well, that one is a charged one. Darling, what do you think about that one?
So my first thought was, I recognize this pinning all injurious actions ever done by anyone on one cause as a religious doctrine that I disagree with. So I think that people act in injurious ways for more reasons than just ignorance. Sometimes they are in full possession of all the relevant facts and they act in ignorant or in injurious ways regardless. So it's not out of ignorance, it's intentional. And so I think he's cheating a little bit here by saying it's ignorant to believe they have the right to hurt, because some people intend to hurt because they feel they have the right, the person deserves it. But like rights and duties and obligations are contextual. So for example, there are certain ways in which I legitimately have the right to hurt people in the jiu-jitsu class. Specific ways in which I am allowed to hurt them. I have the right to hurt them that way, and I enjoy hurting them in those ways that I'm allowed to. There are other ways that I'm not allowed to hurt them. I don't have the right to hurt them in those ways. And so if I cross the boundary, I will be punished in order to create a space where people know, like, you stick within the boundaries, otherwise there will be severe consequences. And that makes a space effectively more safe, even though Rosenberg says no, acting out of fear has this just incalculable costs. I've seen it work very well in situations. And I mean, my coach could have nonviolent communication with these clients, or he could just sit on their chest and be like, see how it feels when people are being rude? Yeah, don't do that to my clients. I'll do this more of this. And it's more efficient. And my coach enjoys it more. And the rest of the class enjoys it more too. So all around fun to be had. But there are other situations too where there are specific like boundaries, rights and duties that are being enforced in certain ways. And there are specific people assigned who not only have a right to punish, but have a duty to punish. So you think of like law enforcement, and I guess Rosenberg's philosophy or ideology goes deep enough that he would want to completely revamp societal use of law enforcement as well, because he thinks it's not compassionate enough or whatever. I'm not so sure. I don't know that. I don't think he's basing that on sound scientific or logical or experimental evidence. I think that's like a religious doctrine he's pushing that I don't share. So yeah, those are the two main things. Like rights and duties are contextual, and sometimes people actually have the right to hurt, and sometimes people enjoy exercising that right. And the other thing is, it's not always ignorance. Sometimes people are fully aware of their options, and they intentionally hurt or injure people, because sometimes some people, in some ways, are intrinsically motivated to injure. And there's something about human nature that Rosenberg is denying exists. He says no human ever is intrinsically motivated to hurt anyone, which is a very strong claim. You can find one example of someone. See, that person hurt someone else and it brought them joy. And when you ask them, why did you hurt that person? They say, because it brings me joy to hurt this person. Like, not because I believe they deserve it, not because I want to teach them a lesson. It's like, no, it pleasured me. That's why. So he's basically saying Schadenfreude doesn't exist. Nobody ever intrinsically takes pleasure in someone else's suffering, which Schadenfreude does exist.
Okay, Algernon, you have a big one.
Oh, don't throw that to me.
address. Okay, guys, who would like to pick up that ball?
Too big a chunk.
Kevin?
I would love to.
Good.
So, like, where should I start on that one? So there's something about, so maybe the point about the duty to punish, right? So this goes back to, I think what he's trying to do is shift into a frame of thinking. So if you're doing stuff out of like a sense of duty or obligation, or because you have to, or you're trying to repent, those are at least some of the categories he tries to outline in some of these workshops. It's like, that is still in this, jackal mindset. He's like, no. That's actually like, you're not in the frame that he's trying to get you to adopt yet. And I think, I could be wrong with this because I haven't heard him talk about this specific example, but the idea of like jujitsu, I don't think that would be violence for him. Like, I think that would be like, because part of it's like, if he wants you to shift to this like place, I think he calls it, it's like natural giving. He actually wrote a song about it. He like plays during one of his workshops, but he's like, if you're like actually in that space of natural giving, where you're not like giving to them, trying to like get something out of it, but like, you're just like enjoying the fact that you're satisfying some need of theirs, right? I think that's completely compatible with you going to jiu-jitsu class where everyone's there to like satisfy this need of theirs, to like, have physical, confrontations, or maybe vent aggression, whatever it is. And then people are all there, like consensually engaging in this activity, all with the kind of the shared understanding of like, yeah, I'm gonna get my shit, kicked in sometimes. And so I think that's like, that does, and again, I think it's counterintuitive, but I think it fits within what he's trying to like shape, like, because he's not trying, like, he's not an analytic philosopher, right? He's not like some experimental scientist. He's someone who like lived through the civil rights movement and like goes to these war-torn countries and like tries to mediate these confrontations between like, an army of people who have like cut off like the arms of, the other side's like loved ones, and like is trying to get them to like reconcile. Like, and it's like some of the stories he has is like, whoa, okay, you're not coming out of this from a very naive, uninformed life of experience. It's like really, really tough shit. And yeah, I think because he does this thing where he's trying to, I think, be very provocative in a way I found familiar, sometimes personally irritating. But so I'll stop there. Tag.
Okay, Graham.
I was going to say, for me, the place that I see a lot of danger in that area is the idea of stepping in to prevent other people harming themselves. because that's sort of, there's the one person's trash is another person's treasure, and it's it kind of seems to overstep some boundaries into stepping on self-determination. It's like there are people who would sit there and say somebody smoking is harming themselves, therefore I need to step in and stop them from smoking so they stop harming themselves. And I'm not sure where Rosenberg has a good metric or filter as to when it's appropriate and when it's not in that area. So going to tag on that one.
Excellent. Algernon, would you like to close it?
Sure. I think, look at my note. I highlighted something here. The inclusion of the idea of injustice, and this I think goes to Graham's point of like how you're perceiving these things and the judgment calls that you're making that are assuming that you're framing it in a given way and then saying, oh, that's what's going on, so it's therefore appropriate for me to use force. And maybe because it's a short chapter, he doesn't really get into it very much, but is sort of a declaration of, oh, you can use it like in the case of if there's injustice. And so when I read that, I was like, okay, so how are you going to define that? And how are you going to, where's the edge? So this is, I think, what made this frustrating for me is that because of these fuzzy definitions, and it's not like they're just trying to make proclamations about, like, for example, here, the corrective process should be educational. Is probably too broad. Like, it's, I think, a good goal. And if it's available via nonviolent communication, then good first step. So in a way, this chapter is sort of like, when that fails, you should. And then it's like, don't let it fail. It can't fail. Kind of feels that way to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Upcycle Club in the comments asked Bing, ChatGPT to comment.
Oh,
No. Yeah, like shut out ChatGPT. I think that using protective force should be a last resort, and that it should be followed by communication and that empathy to resolve trust and harmony. Communication, empathy,
Ideally.
and ideally. I wanted to address a part where other people are fully aware and not ignorant of the consequences of their actions. I heard that so many times, though. People who would inflict punishment onto others, you were fully aware of everything that will follow, and you were fully aware of what you are doing. To the people who absolutely had no fucking idea, and this and that I think this is the part that Marshall B. Rosenberg talks about, that you have to just assume that people aren't aware. Being absolutely sure that others know exactly what they are doing and inflicting punishment because they're evil might be wrong assumption. So the way I understood that part of the chapter was ignorance. Just imagine the others are ignorant, or at least ask, perhaps they do it willingly. They're 100% aware that that's exactly what they're doing right now.
So if they're ignorantly harming others.
Yes. So people who are absolutely ignorant about harming others, they're doing it, but not because they're evil. But
are you okay to use protective force in that case?
I mean, the way he asks is that you should explain to people what they are doing if they keep hurting others just because, like, oh, I'm not hurting others, and then like, no, you actually do. Yeah.
But we're in a space here of communication has failed. I forget what the original statements there were, right? Dialogue is not possible, ...
I mean,
So
also,
like, when can you use it? And is this saying if the other people are ignorant and they're harming others by that ignorance, then it's
mhm.
okay for you to use protective force? Or is it saying no? Even then, just let it happen. Just try to talk to them. You're like, and if you can't talk to them, just let it go. That doesn't feel like a right resolution to me.
So again, I think, and
mhm.
I don't think this book can stand alone without like his whole workshop space. But
Probably
like,
so.
because in one of the workshops, he actually gives an actual example from his life where he's like, yeah, he was like next to some lady, maybe she was an old lady, but like someone walked up and punched her in the face, and he was like, there is no time to talk. Like, I'm not going
Ow.
to try to reason with this person. So he physically restrained the person, but he, his point was like, but I didn't like, I wasn't
Okay.
trying to like make them suffer. I wasn't trying to like, be like, repent. I'm going to inflict more pain on you to like, get you into this, guilt and shame kind of cycle, which is another thing he's trying to like move away from. It's like, don't do the guilt shame thing. That's actually part of this jackal thinking that he's going to like, try to shift people away from. But yeah, sorry. Tag out.
I think you make a good point that this probably doesn't stand well alone. And that's some of what we're just reading it alone without the other, the context that you're bringing to it. And I appreciate you doing so. And one of the things that I do that one is the point of whether they're conscious of that they're inflicting pain onto others by their action or if they're unconscious of it. And I think that's what some of what Rosenberg's talking about is that if you start out with the idea that they're not, that they're ignorant of it, so you bring it to their attention, you try to bring it into their consciousness, and at that point in time, that now makes them have the choice of whether they're going to be inflicting it or restraining from that action that they now know hurts people. And I think the way you tell whether people are doing it intentionally is if you keep bringing it to their consciousness, 3, 4, 5 times in a row, and they keep doing it anyway, that's either because they can't do any differently or they're intentionally doing it that way. So I'm going to tag on those sorts of concepts.
Yeah,
I was
I
going to
think
say
the
that,
situation.
Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
Like the situation when you try to, because like this is not a Rosenberg thing. It's a very common belief that if people are causing harm out of ignorance, they're less culpable than people who are intentionally and consciously causing harm. So that's not a novel idea. But what I've seen quite commonly is then people then use deliberate willful ignorance to avoid becoming aware of the ways in which they're causing harms, and then using ignorance as an excuse for why they're not blameworthy or punish-worthy. So I've had this difficulty trying to communicate with people, saying I feel like I'm being harmed, and they basically do a la la la, I can't hear you, let's talk about something else, and try to have that conversation 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, and doesn't really work. Sometimes they'll kind of let me say my thing, but not really listen. And then when I get angry, they don't understand why I'm angry.
Rebellion, extinction.
I mean, I had example of children being punished by a parent, and the parent were repeating to children, but you know exactly that's what your action was wrong. You know exactly it was wrong. Now you're being punished for the wrong action you were doing. And the children had no fucking idea still, and being punished by a parent. And the parent was just punishing out of anger, and because children did something that had bad consequence for the parent. The children gossiped or stuff, like said some family secrets outside. And the parent was like, you know exactly those were family secrets. Now, like, experience the severe punishment. And the way that the parents would tell to children they knew exactly what they're doing is by like, I repeatedly told you this is a family secret. Repeat, and the child was like, no concept of family secrets, no concept of anything, like complete. And like, don't look so innocently. You know exactly what you were doing. And I told you 50 times, and now experience the punishment. Even in that case, the children still could not understand. because the experience of family secrets was something foreign to them. They could not get it. It's like trying to explain air to a fish. And so in that case, let's say I would, the inability of another person to understand, even after being repeatedly said so, is also to be taken into consideration. Not everybody is able to see it. It's also like not everybody is as us.
Well, so that actually relates to an important point that I think Algernon made earlier in the talk about like developmental stages. Like if you're talking to a person who's not able to function at this giraffe level that Rosenberg wants everyone to function, but they are able to understand family secret is something that if I talk to strangers about that, I will get hurt a lot. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna not talk to strangers about that. If you can make them understand that, and it's much easier to make them understand that than trying to make them understand the subtleties of sort of dirty laundry in public and family reputation and like business implications for family reputation. So you can, like, very difficult to explain the social context to them, easy to explain to them. If you do this, you will regret it.
Yeah. And so as a consequence, does the child value the family secret, or does the child act out of fear?
Well, so yeah, so in that case, the child would be acting out of fear, and Rosenberg says that's a kind of tragedy, and maybe that is a kind of tragedy. But if the child is not at a place where they can understand, where they can act from a place of empathic understanding, compassion, because they're just not developing mentally there yet, then it's better if they act correctly out of fear than if they act injuriously out of ignorance.
I'm not sure I'm behind that logic though, because I actually believe no family secrets is worth it. Like there is a too high price to pay for a family secret. So if a child already goes out and like spills out the family secrets and being punished for that, like that, without giving the proper context or time or like even the empathy to develop, the child grows up to be a shitty person, full of fear and stuff like that, because it's like, oh no, that's how I get my way. It's like just like, yeah, through punishment. He actually goes to talk about it further on, the consequences of punishment. So guys, before I move, would you like to address that?
No.
I think there's at least just another like aspect I want to bring in, because I don't know if it's like if he addresses it in the previous chapters or we'll get to it. But another frame he seems partial towards is this idea of like power over people versus power with people, and that this idea of using like, because I forgot how he uses it, because he both mentions this in the workshops and also I think in this chapter, where it's like he has this idea of like, well, ask what is the effect you want to have, like what do you want them to do, and then ask what are the reasons you want them to do it. And these two questions I think are trying to be these like general guiding guides, I guess, to facilitate a shift into this headspace he's trying to, I think, advocate for. Yeah, I'll stop there. Sorry, actually, one more thing. I realized that I don't know if he ever addresses this, because this is actually, I think, a big issue, is like, does he address what Nordalian and Algernon brought up, is like the capacity for developmental stages to like be a thing? Because it kind of, depending on your background, it kind of self-evidently is, at least if you like watch kids, right? There's a certain stage in which like they think like, oh, bigger coin does not mean more valuable. There's like this level of abstraction that you can kind of like break into a different frame of reference. I don't know how he deals with that, or if that's ever reconciled, or if it can't be in his framework, but yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. It's a good point, actually. So we have some addition to our comment. Yeah, Graham.
I was going to say I had a few things to say there, and one of them is I see it different with children who who a parent has responsibility over versus other interactions where they can like basically exit and separate their lives with the people. And that was some of what I was talking about, is at a certain stage, if the other person is violating your boundaries and hurting you, it doesn't matter whether they're just unable to learn the lesson and stop or whether they're doing it intentionally. You know that that's just not a relationship you can continue. Now, kids are an entirely separate category, and that presents as, how can you teach them those lessons that they desperately need to learn? And some of those, like family secrets, like if you have jobs or something, parents have jobs and stuff that they just can't have their children blabbing all over the place. And how do you start to teach your kids discretion? And some of that comes like with privacy. That should come with like the lessons of why you wear clothes. And the last one is, to a certain extent, the parents, when they're acting in that way, they're working from a power hierarchy, which is sort of inherently, violent. It, carries the threat of violence with it. It's basically, I can do violence to you and you can't fight back, and that's just how the world works. Which is definitely, you have moved far beyond Rosenberg's NVC concept. So take a nap.
Yeah, there is definitely a difference between communication with children that you have responsibility over. That's a very vulnerable kind of space versus having people in your life that you can kind of just, I guess you can't stop doing and hurting people and bye. So that sort of thing gives a lot of freedom and agency, let's say. And we have comments from Upper Cycle Club and Cordell. So I think if a person can't keep a secret, they can't expect others to keep it. True, actually true. And as far as for punishment, I think only us can punish ourselves in such a way that it actually impacts our own psyche. Others can teach us a lesson, like for sure, but the true punishment comes from our own kind of internal reaction and pain and suffering that we allow ourselves to experience. Sometimes, like, we have no control over it. I would reject all forms of punishment from others, even if it was righteously seen by a majority, but not by myself. I agree with you on that, Cordell. I mean, if I feel something is right, I could be punished over and over, but it would not change my personal perspective of what is right. I tend to avoid punishment. It might actually make me more certain that what is seen as a mistake was right, just because I would be punished instead of explained why it would be wrong.
I think that it points at a difficulty there, which is like if you're ideologically captured, let's say, and that's too simple a thing, but like you're really into something and you've convinced yourself and you have all your data worked out and you have listened to hours and hours of people who completely agree with you or that you agree with them, as it turned out. And you believe that somebody else is being harmed. We could go for climate or whatever. And therefore you feel justified in taking whatever physical action you're taking. And you're going to see enemies that come at you who counter any of your supposed, your sacred things that you're not allowed to not believe. You'll see them as enemies, and you by this definition here, you can feel entirely justified to use physical force, and live in your own delusion. And you're not going to be open really to having an open discussion with them. So
in case
I
of
can see a
families,
lot of like today's modern social media spaces where we can get out of the whole childhood, and dynamics there, where you're just have like say activist groups interacting, that each side is going to feel entitled in this framework to impose physical force if they believe that the result of the other people not listening, and they're not listening to us, is to start blowing things up. And so in a way, this kind of gives an acceptance of that, which I disagree with.
I was going to say my way of handling this is that whole separating feeling, thinking, and believing into three different truth values. Sort of the old, again, my pathos, logos, ethos split. And it's my idea is that if all three of them agree, that means I don't have any logical fallacies. That means it's being reasonable, it's realistic, and it's like at that point in time, I'm comfortable taking action. And again, on something like a violence sort of situation. But if they disagree, and that's why, especially like if my feelings don't match the logic of the situation, I'm not going to let my feelings run rampant over my logic. I want the two of them to agree. So that's my way of handling it. Going to tag on that.
Mhm. Thank you. That's excellent. Guys, would you like to address a little bit more the previous subject, or we can move on to more punitive action?
All right. I think another angle that is worth bringing up is this idea of the child category, which is, I guess, in some sense, historically new. He also wants to kind of push against that because he's going to, Rosenberg, I think, has a sense that is kind of inherently dehumanizing. And it's like kind of, which goes to this whole like power over versus like power with. I think he thinks it's possible for people to like get in this relationship where it's like you're trying to empower the child. But again, it's part of this whole constellation of things. I think he's trying to provocatively demonstrate and get people to practice, which is a thing like you can't. He literally has these like hand puppets in these workshops. There's like a little jackal, a little giraffe, and he has these like stupid, goofy little giraffe ears that he puts on, or like he puts on the jackal, or he'll get the person who's doing the activity to like wear them and be like, all right, put on the giraffe ears. Let's try to listen past what they're saying and look, So there's I think an entirely perspective building and participatory element that is, I don't think you can capture that in a book. Which, and I also like, this is kind of a technical thing, or more logistical thing. That I think part of this book is also to like help him like fund the activity, because he has this like framing in his workshop. He's like, I don't want you to pay for the book. I don't want a payment. I want you to feel as though like this is a gift you're giving me because you would like to facilitate like these kind of techniques and approaches to be more prolific in the world, to hopefully reduce violence at scale. So tag out.
Yeah, that idea of play that he introduces in the workshops, they aren't in the actual book. It's not as let's say humorous as well as in the workshop. You cannot see it. That actually the delivery of workshops is way better. I've seen some episodes and videos. There are multiple of them. Guys, please check it out. I highly recommend it. I do like his part where he's like, just imagine that the other person does not understand. Do not believe the other person for sure 100% know exactly what you're feeling and do it. They do it because they're evil. Imagine they don't, and try to come through that part. And so he proceeds further talking about punitive action. So punitive action is based on the assumption that people commit offenses because they are bad, evil, it's premeditated, and to correct the situation, they need to be made to repent. And the correction is designed to make them suffer enough to see the error of their ways, make them repent, force them to change. Well, in practice, it has the opposite effect. People more likely would avoid you and harbor resentment, hostility. They will not understand, they will see it as an action against them, misunderstanding. And it would be counterproductive to a thing that you actually were trying to achieve. So, yeah, that's a heavy subject. Let Nerdalian to unpack it.
Yeah, so the examples I'm thinking of, a point Graham made earlier about people having multiple goals or multiple intentions to do the same action is quite relevant. So goals can be multiple and they can be hierarchical and they can have different priorities and stuff. And so one of the things Rosenberg considers to be a form of punishment is negative judgment. And so one of the possibilities that can happen if one spends some time with a person, doing this giraffe kind of approach to them, trying to understand their intentions, trying to understand their feelings, trying to understand their worldview, and you get to know the person like, oh, this is a person with a kind of intentions and a kind of worldview that is going to lead them to harm people around them over and over again, and they're going to continue to harm people around them because of their intentions and their worldview, until their intentions and their worldview changes. As long as it doesn't change, they're going to be, so it could be like a causal prediction, like this person is delusional in certain ways and is sort of trying to meet their needs in ways that are harmful to others and not seeing the harm, and using self-deceptive techniques to avoid becoming aware of the ways in which they're harming people. And for those kinds of people are common enough, they're not so common, but they're common enough that in the English language they have developed words to describe them. All kinds of words, but just like selfish or greedy or whatever. And the thing is, calling them those kinds of names in public could be seen as a forceful way of harming their reputation, and it can definitely hurt their feelings, can definitely cause suffering. And depending on the kind of person who does that, they may experience some schadenfreude from the suffering they're inducing, and also be doing that as a way to inform the people around the selfish or the greedy people, let's say, that you're dealing with a selfish and greedy person who's pretending to be otherwise. And if you're not careful, you're going to get harmed. So there's informing people around this person who are at risk of being harmed of the kind of person this person is, in a way that looks like just insulting them. But if you've gotten to know a person and they happen to be one of these people who treat people abusively and exploitatively, then you can, if you're the kind of person who enjoys meting out punishment, you can simultaneously meet your need to enjoy punishing someone and serve the need of protective force and protect the well-being of the other people that are at risk of being harmed.
Algernon?
This has gotten too complex and too abstract and too many examples and too many things said that, if I had a specific question or thing I could comment on, I would, but I'm just going to say, and next. Because
Okay.
it's too unfocused. Like, just take one example and look at it, not like, oh, and there's this thing I heard about, and then this is classic teachers and there's this other stuff. And you're like, okay, fine. Like, I don't have that context. So anyway, that's how I feel at the moment. A little flustered by the 5 million directions.
Specifically about correction, it's people who would think they are righteous to correct behavior of others by inflicting force, or how Nerdalian said, somebody's reputation in order to warn others. Like, are there like I have my own thoughts on it, but I will keep them for last. And
I mean, I think that those correct, to read the list there, the corrective
Mhm.
actions designed to make them suffer enough to see the error of their ways.
Mhm.
I don't think, I think applying some amount of suffering to make a point, like withholding privileges, can be okay. I think just doing it for Schadenfreude, almost always going to be the wrong choice. Making them repent seems like that I'm going to be out on that one. Forcing them to change, I don't think that's ever going to work. And I agree entirely with his comment that, that's much more likely to just induce a resistance movement in the other person, where their goal now just becomes to resist your tyranny. And so I would agree that that's seldom going to be a useful path for anyone to traverse.
Mhm.
I don't
Graham.
leave it there.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in where I see Rosenberg kind of breaking down here, and that's with the idea of hurt feelings is the same as other sorts of hurts. And again, I admit I'm old and was raised with sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And some of this is, if the person's violating your boundaries and hurting you, telling them that they're hurting you is going to hurt their feelings. And it's almost like Rosenberg is saying you shouldn't get to complain about that one. And that basically you should just suck it up and take whatever hurts they deliver to you. And breaking that down to a learning ones is you need to learn basic things like math. If the person puts 2 + 2 = 7, it's going to hurt their feelings when you tell them they're wrong. But if you don't tell them they're wrong, they're going to max out credit cards and not be able to handle finances later in life. So, it's to a certain extent, I'm kind of siding with Algernon, where, especially when it comes to feelings, it's the painful truth versus the comfortable lie, which ends up hurting more in the long run. And, I think that you have to accept some hurt feelings, especially if they're based on things that are entirely factual. And that's where you're getting away from the punitive aspect. You're not punishing them because they put 2 + 2 = 7. They're just wrong. So they're going to tag out on that.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. There is factual hurt, but there is also one like who decides the actual truth, because there are different worldviews. And if talking about truth that is undeniable, 2 + 2 = 7, is one thing. But there is another one which is based on your personal hurt feelings, and then I'm going to punish that person based on my hurt feelings because 2 + 2 = 7, and I have to set the things right. But then that is not applied to the situation. Let's say, Kevin.
Yeah, so I guess actually, I just remembered another thing I should bring in is he has this phrase in again one of the workshops of screaming in giraffe, and then someone's like, "Oh, I want to do that." That sounds like I think they were saying that as from place catharsis of oh wait, I get to scream, that's actually okay, which is funny because I watched the previous live stream and or recording yesterday, and even though it sounds like contradiction, I know I actually think I have a an example from my life that I got to witness where he's like, yeah, if you're in a place of pain, right, it's in the person's trying to is speaking to you in Jackal, as he would say, then, and if you're too overwhelmed in that moment to deal with that, it's of course legitimate to be hey, I'm actually in too much pain to hear where you're coming from, so I need some time, or I need some space, or I need to also just kind of work through this. The example I can remember from a former roommate of mine is there's some weird situation, and he had it, I think, I don't know, misunderstood what was going on, and walked in the room and started yelling at one of my roommates. And in the middle of doing this, he realized, based on the reaction in the room, that like, oh wait, I think I'm misunderstanding something. But he was already too like, limbically or emotionally engaged, to where like in the middle of his like, Tyra was like, oh, how dare you, da da da. In the middle of it, he was like, all right, I think I'm really confused right now, and I'm too upset to like have a reasonable conversation. So I'm gonna go back to my room and we'll talk about this whenever I'm not so upset. I thought that was like the funniest, like kind of like, like he realized I can't stop, the reaction I'm having. It's already too late. Like I'm already like in that headspace, but I can kind of like voice that in so many ways, and then remove myself from the situation to try to hopefully, not do something he would regret. And so. And that's okay. So that's one thing, right? A different kind of aspect from the previous points that brought up is this idea of like, oh yeah, like people, punitive punishment will also have this like kind of backfire effect. People like will just double down on it. But there's another way this goes wrong that I think Rosenberg is equally concerned about, where it's like treat someone like as a criminal, and they'll be like, oh, I'll show you like what kind of criminal I can be if you're gonna assume that about me, as some immutable trait of my character. This other way this goes, I think, badly for Rosenberg is it creates this, I think what he called like an internalized jackal, where it's like there's like the sense of like internal like judgment and like guilt and shame that you're always kind of like reinvoking, I guess, where it's like, oh, okay, like because in one of these examples he goes through with someone, it's like it's like, who's the person you're upset with? And it's like, okay, one of my employees, because like they're always like late to work, and it's like, okay. So then like in this fictitious exchange, the employee who he's role playing as, it's like has this internalized sense of like, well, I don't want to show up, right? Like it's like I don't want people to tell me things tell me to do things, right? I don't want to do. But like because of him growing up and his parents always being punctual and telling me that's really important, you should be punctual, and always chastising him whenever he was late, he's internalized this kind of like guilt shame spiral that's like kind of dislodging him from being able to hear what the other person's saying and like what needs they're coming from. And then like again, he's like role playing this person, but it resolves in this employee like recognizing, oh, actually I do want to like help satisfy the needs of my manager here, because that'd be cool, and like I understand like what you really need is trust, for the people you work with to be there and to be reliable and dependable and reachable, so that way we can kind of cooperate and get what we need to get done. So anyway, so those are two different things, and I will tag up.
Okay, so we have comments, just quite a lot from Ordell. I think agreement can only happen when one reaches mutual understanding, or two people reach mutual understanding. Punishment can push away the mutual understanding. Then from Upcycle Club, some kids don't have parents. Consider a kid that vandalizes a kiosk. Instead of sending the kid to juvie, apply instead restorative justice. Let the kid to work for the kiosk owner. That's a great idea. Actually, I agree. Cordell, I think the punishers tend to be as bad as the person who hurt somebody else, in the sense that it's the same act. I mean, it depends on the situation. Then perhaps behind we justified through values. Yeah, that self-justification part I have problem with, because I've seen people like just go and punish somebody based on wrong assumptions. But then that's the difference between the one that hurts others and the personal feelings. The person that hurts because a system tells them is just to hurt somebody. I mean, it always comes from somewhere. The reason to hurt or punish somebody else, the reason to restore the justice or to warn others that there is an evil person that hurts everybody, and hear how she will hurt or he will hurt everybody, and like pay attention. It's in some cases it's justified. So in some cases there is actual danger. Let's say there is a rapist on the loose, and you do have to go and like warn others, like there is a rapist on the loose, please take care, be careful. In other cases where the action is taken based on the opinion, I like, it depends how sure of the truth the person is. It's like the level of conviction, let's say. So that's my take on it. Guys, would you like to add something to it?
I want to put a simple scenario, and then we can apply this stuff in this chapter, and you can tell me what the correct solution is applying the doctor's technique is. Supposing you have a kid, I guess it depends if you're the parent or not, but let's just sort of abstract it, who is fat. Do you tell the kid they're fat? Because it's going to cause pain, and it's good. You know, and I'm not like, let's get rid of the straw man of like, you're just doing it because you like to make the kid squirm. Like you have the intention of, you want them to be, you know, a healthier person or something. But, and this is like a pretty fat kid, so it's not a like a gentle fat. And so your goal is to help the person live a better life, but it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation. What's the non, and I'm assuming here that, you know, force is that you're going to, you know, punitively point out to them that their eating habits are not constructive to what you see as a positive life.
I mean, have a crack at it.
Okay.
Force would be, yeah. Like as far as I'm concerned, force would be to punish them for eating at all. Like each time they eat, you punish them, instead of as opposed to non-violently. Like there is a reason why you want the kid to be skinny, and so how do you deliver that reason? Because there is a need, there is a request, there is a feeling, there is observation. Observation, the kid is like overweight. Then there is a need. I guess the need is because if you are concerned parent, you would like your kid to be happy. Plus, there is certain social standards that you're like, even though you love the kid the way the kid is, but there is you are aware that if you will keep enabling your kid, so the delivery, I guess, is what would make it violent or not violent. And in the previous chapters, he talked about request versus demand. So demand, you ask for something, and then if the person does not comply, you punish that person. And punishment could be verbal, physical, or like withholding benefits. That's the third type of punishment that Marshall B. Rosenberg names. Yeah, and request, it would be like you request something, but you will add the components that would make the child understand why you're doing it. But also ask, maybe there is a way, there's a playful way to find out how to get what you both want. Let's say if the child wants to eat, I mean, sweets and stuff, and the parent, like, you can negotiate things. Because you can eat sweets and still keep skinny. It's like, you can eat that much ice cream, but after that, treadmill. You have to lose all those calories. Like, do you want to eat that badly? How much do you like ice cream? You have to awareness is very important. So Nerdalian, sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to say that, so the difference between punitive and protective force would be mostly an intention. So in this case scenario, if your intention is to hurt the kid's feelings because you have resentment towards the little bastard, and you tell them, yes, you're fat. If they ask like, am I fat? And like you're all vulnerable, just about to cry kind of way, and you immediately tell them, yes, you're disgusting and fat, because you wanted to hurt their feelings. punitive force. If they're asking, "Am I fat?" and you like lovingly tell them, "Yes, you are, but that
Yes,
can
you are."
change," in order to sort of protect them from the delusion that they're skinny and
Yeah.
help them improve their health and stuff, that would be protective use of force.
This doesn't seem at all controversial, but you're going to induce, pain in that process,
Yeah,
especially if the
still
kid
not.
is unaware.
But
I
that's
guess
still
this
not.
goes to the educational point that he made earlier. Like if your
Yeah,
aim is to educate the kid and try to find a framing that's
Right.
not just like you're an oinker and you're always going to be an oinker if you keep it up.
and you should feel so ashamed of yourself and your body. Like
Yeah,
he's- again,
exactly.
yeah,
Or if you're a parent who went through that as a kid and you're like assume that kid's life is going to be like yours and you just project it onto them, that's also not possibly constructive.
Kevin?
But I guess to me it calls for like there's always these nuances, and so there's so much of these things where he's like, don't do that, and then that's punitive, but this, and then when I look at like an actual scenario, I'm like, that's going to cause pain, that could cause shame, that could be withholding of a privilege, that could be so many different violations of these guidelines that it makes me question the guidelines.
Well, I don't think though he is concerned about not inflicting pain, because like preventative use of force would lead to that necessarily. Listen, something like the example of him like guys punching Lane in the face, I have to stop him. Maybe that means like I throw him on the ground, and that's going to do something that's like physically painful. Or it's like, well, and the example you gave, which I need to like challenge that framing a little bit, where it's like, okay, so does it actually matter? Like, okay, I think if I want to try to interpret your case or I'm trying to like build a case for you, but like hopefully does it justice, where it's like, it's not the fact that they look a certain way. It's the fact there's going to be health implications for the current, like, like whatever their lifestyle happens to be. And one is concerned that if one doesn't intervene some way, right? Like if I don't because, and actually I have a friend who did this with one of her kids who was starting to become obese, is that she didn't like try to like punish him in this like certain sense that Rosenberg means. She was trying to facilitate other options, right? Like, trying to be like, oh, like, like recognizing he had a need for eating sweet things, but then also recognizing that could be satisfied by eating a banana versus like, a Hershey's chocolate bar. And so like that's,
Ooh,
I think, closer
bad
to this.
parenting right there.
Well, it's I mean, yeah, but the I guess the point trying to be illustrated is this sense of like, you don't have to facilitate this mindset of internalized guilt and shame of like, oh, I'm such a terrible person, I need to repent, like I don't deserve this, I deserve to be like punished or suffering to some capacity, or this other fail mode of like, oh, fine, if you're not give this to me, then I want to like go super 100 degrees in the opposite, or 100 percent in the opposite direction. That either one of those, I think he's trying to shift around that, which and it's like he's not an analytical philosopher. He's not trying to build a super airtight case with the linguistic constraints he has available to him. It's funny because like even the quotes like in the pages where it's like, fear of corporal punishment, I have this one pulled up, obscures children's awareness of the compassion underlying parental demands. It's very assertive, but the actual passage it's taken from has a qualifying statement before it, saying my personal concern is that children's fear of like, my concern is this. He's not like asserting it as absolute be all end all claim. So yeah, it's just like, I feel like we just have to shift out of that mindset, which maybe is difficult for the autistically inclined, which I happen to be, and I feel like it's probably the majority cognitive headspace is on this call. But yeah, tag up.
I was going to say, I saw a couple of different approaches. The first one I see, it could be argued nonviolent, but I'm not sure Rosenberg would approve of it. And that's basically, you explain to the kid that he's on a path that if he continues on it, he's basically going to become a tub of lard. And if he goes to the beach, he's going to be in danger of being rolled back into the ocean because he's mistaken for a beached whale. Now,
Okay, that sounds
that's
like a
probably
aunt.
again, you can take that. You're basically offering the negative example of what he could become if he continues on this bad path. And the other one, which I think Rosenberg would endorse, would be basically explaining to him the health consequences, explaining to him how it's going to shorten his life, how it's going to reduce the quality of his actual physical life. He may be enjoying more of an emotional, satisfaction from the eating food and everything. But I'd also say explore to him and see what he knows about his reasons for why he's eating so many calories.
Yeah.
And try to get underneath that to see if there's some some damage that's been done or something that could be corrected or some way to divert the whole situation. And again, I think Rosenberg would sign off on that one. Probably not my first example, though. Tag.
So I'd like to just mention that, like, it's just a case where it gets really difficult to deal with people, whether you're trying to deal with them non-violently or whether you're a person who enjoys indulging in a bit of violence every now and then. Food and obesity is one of those things where, at least for a significant percentage of people, you're dealing with a kind of addiction. So there may be like a insulin sensitivity that's developed and metabolic changes in the body that's developed, that basically they're fat because they're addicted to a certain pattern of eating, and changing that is going to be just as difficult as quitting smoking, or for alcoholics maybe to stop drinking. And so just for a class of people who are addicts and whose addictive behaviors are not only causing harm to themselves, they're putting others at risk. So think maybe of alcoholics or people addicted to more serious drugs, and that putting others at risk when they get behind driver's wheels and stuff. Like, the way brains work is a lot of these people really do understand that they're putting other people at danger. They really do understand the risk that they're putting themselves at, and they compulsively continue to act in the ways that they're doing, not out of ignorance. So, like, I think addiction is one of the several other possibilities of reasons why people act in ways that are injurious to others that aren't ignorance. It can get complicated, and you could say, like, it doesn't help to try to force to change an addict to change. It doesn't help to try to force an addict to change. That sentence came out straight. And yeah, most of the time it doesn't. But like, at some point, if you're a social worker and there's a family in distress because one of the parents is a severe alcoholic and beating the others, physically and verbally abusing others regularly, like, I think determining protective versus punitive force can be a little tricky. And I'm inclined to forgive the victims for being resentful and taking pleasure in their abusers being stopped or maybe even put behind bars. Like, if someone's been a victim of severe abuse and their abuser gets brought to justice and they take pleasure in that, I can easily empathize with that. I don't feel the need to morally say, well, really, you shouldn't take pleasure in the punitive force there. What you should do is have compassion for your abuser. And I don't know, I don't want to go to victims of abuse and say, what you really need is compassion for your abuser. And what you're doing by feeling resentment and harboring desires for revenge, and when those desires are satisfied, taking pleasure in that, you're contributing to the awful violent state that the world is in. And it's because of the things people like you do that this world is riddled with violence and problems and stuff. I think, well, no, sometimes revenge and justice feels good, and that's okay.
I don't know if there are that many
V
people
for
who
Vendetta.
enjoy revenge or violence. I actually met really few. Mostly people avoid things. Like oh, you're like the revenge violent type. Oh, and no, thank you. Like that's like, in my case, Graham, You were trying to say something?
No, I wasn't going to add anything there.
It was Algernon.
Sorry, Algernon.
Maybe it's just a mic bump.
Oh, I think I didn't realize it was only me. So, and I think Rosenberg actually explicitly agrees with the point Nodalian's making. It's like, because someone like, mentions like, well, what about like, if you're a victim of abuse or there's like some trauma, right? The person is like a part of this, relationship. And he, I think eventually does want to move people into that space of like, try to find compassion, right, for the person to try to like relate to like what need was that coming from, as opposed to the explanation they give for it. But he doesn't say a start there. It's like that's like part of a very long process. He's like, no, you don't say, all right, person who's like, dealing with trauma, have empathy for your abuse. It's like, no. He's not trying to do that. But also there's this, what was it? The, oh man, I'm losing the thread. Yeah, I'll stop for a little bit.
I personally try to understand it, like the empathy part, trying to understand why, let's say, people doing what they are doing. What's the reasons behind it? But I personally, projection here, try to understand it in order to plan my future actions. Let's say, what can I do in that situation? Like now I know why people do what they do. So what can I do in order to kind of make the world a better place? And so in case of addiction, forcing an addict to quit just because like I may withhold some benefits, or I will punish them verbally, or I will, let's say, I don't know, inflict physical pain, sounds like counterintuitive, like it would not work. That's what I get from this book. Let's say that my actions will lead to counter result. And then, so based on that knowledge, what are the next steps I could do? Expressing non-violently to an addict. Here it is, my needs, my observation. I think, what are your needs? What are your observations and feelings and requests? Like you can do all of that, but if it doesn't bring result, I don't think force is a answer at all. Like I don't like behavior we are seeking, the thing we are needing from that person, we will not achieve by using force, either from addict or from a child that we wish to educate. It's like there has to be another way. And again, as I agree with Graham, in case of people we committed to, like children, like we cannot just like, oh no, sucks to be you, child, go. And like we can't. So there has to be some more innovative approach. But in case of adult people interacting, I think that's the all. If you tried all the methods, and definitely punitive action will not work. Like there is no way it will work.
When on that was the other thread I forgot about that you reminded me, Kara. So Nadalian, the idea of like, well, the alcoholic, right, is not ignorant of like the consequences of like what they're doing, and like again, it's like one of these examples he brings up in this workshop where it's like, all right, it's like you have this alcoholic who's shows up to him and like, oh, the problem is I'm alcoholic. It's like I know I shouldn't do this, right? I went to the doctor, I saw the X-ray of my liver. It's like gonna become a raisin. And it's like, so he's he makes this point, which I think is partially rhetorical, of like, well, the problem, like, you don't drink because you're alcoholic. You're drinking to serve some need. And in this framing, I think he might consider that as like there is a kind of ignorance, but the ignorance is like, why am I doing this in the first place? Like, what is it that I'm trying to satisfy, right, at a deeper level than just the kind of story I'm building, which is another framing that I don't know if this ever gets laid out in the book, but he does make a distinction whenever he's getting people to work through these like kind of scenarios in role play, usually or actually always with like a thing that they were really dealing with, where it's like, okay, what is the observation? It's like the first step is like try to make a clear observation, which I think appeals to Graham's idea of like what is the causal kind of situation, like, you know, what is they literally said, like let's just get that like down locked in. It's like, well, you know, my stepmother said that I couldn't, what was it, so I tried to talk to my stepmother about wanting to see my father more, and she just shut me down. He's like, no, you're jumping to explaining like what that, like, no, what did she say? He's like, she said, it's not my problem, go talk to your father, right? And it's like, okay, so we have a clear observation. It's like, okay, so the stimulus is like this phrase that she said. Okay, and what was your response to that phrase? She's like, well, I felt upset. Like I felt like, you know, hurt because I felt like that was her, you know, opting out of communicating. She tried to get closer to my father, wanted to spend more time with him, and that was not allowing for that to happen. It's okay, so what is the need, you know, that's coming from? Like, you know, he's trying to get her to work through it. It's like, well, I need to be closer and feel more connected to my father. It's like, okay. And so he's doing this very like deliberate thing, which I think is, I don't think he has some partiality, certain cognitive approaches, but it reminds me of stuff in like CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy, where it's like, okay, like what is like the thought, right? What is like the emotional response to that? Like trying to separate those two is, I think, part of what he wants people to get in the habit of doing. But again, it's like, I think what his PhD is in like clinical psychology, so he's not trying to build, you know, an airtight theory. It's like he's trying to get like practical things people can do to hopefully, I think, improve the quality of their lives, or be life-serving, as you might want to frame. Indifferent.
I'm glad you brought up CBT. CBT has a very large body of scientific evidence behind it that it works, and so there are a lot of techniques and practices and homework sheets and things that people can have a look at and they can apply. They can get the information fairly cheaply online too. It's better when there's a professional guiding one through that, but one can educate oneself for very cheaply. I wanted to say something about this kind of ignorance, because if you're going to start messing with definitions of word, you can always make a rhetorical statement that it was a kind of ignorance. But I'm just going to try to make a very common sense kind of outline for like severities of transgression of boundaries. So let's say a CEO of a pharmaceutical company is trying to improve profits and trying to keep the board happy, and by doing so, it turns out they violate some laws about drug safety research, and some patients who take the medication get very adverse effects, and let's say they die, just for the sake of argument. Now, we're going to evaluate just how culpable the CEO is, and there are a couple of different options. One option is they really care about their patients. They went through a lot of effort to try to find information about ways in which things could go wrong. They tried to get all the information they can about the regulations they were supposed to follow. It was difficult for them to see that what they did was skirting a regulation and foresee the consequences that what they were doing would cause harm. So they did not want to cause harm. They had other motives. They wanted to improve profits and keep the board happy. And they acted out of ignorance after due diligence search. In that case, we're likely to think that this is a good CEO. We want to keep them around. We don't want to fire them for the fact that they made a mistake and some people got hurt. Different case, CEO did due diligence and found out about the regulations and the risk that the patients might be harmed, and decided, well, they really don't want to harm people, but they really want to improve profits and they want to keep the board happy. They care more about that than the harm. So knowingly, they violated the rules. It turned out people got harmed, not because they wanted to, but they wanted to do something else. They just didn't really care. That CEO is more culpable, and maybe you would want to say they deserve to be fired. or like in another scenario, they might say they were ignorant of the possibility of harming people, but they were willfully ignorant. They deliberately neglected to do the research and find the information. So they actively distracted themselves and kept themselves busy with other things. And there were things they should have known if they did their homework, that it's their job to do, but they failed to do that homework. So it's out of negligence, for they were ignorant. And so yeah, there aren't people out of ignorance, but it was a culpable ignorance, like because of negligence. And then there's like a sadistic CEO who figured they really like killing patients, and they can both improve their profits and kill some patients by doing this thing. So they know they're going to kill patients, they know, and they want to, and they take pleasure in that. And that kind of CEO, we want to say, that's like the worst CEO. Well, that person should be taken out of society. We don't want people like that in our society at all. They're completely converted into a different person or just removed from society. We don't want those kinds of people. And when Rosenberg says things like, people only ever act injuriously out of ignorance, he's like doing a sophistical move where he's like pretending people don't sometimes, like there's no distinction between people wanting to do bad and people doing bad by accident out of ignorance, and kind of painting over everyone who ever causes harm is the same as the first CEO who really cares, who did their homework, accidentally hurt someone, which that CEO is clearly deserving of being a CEO and we want to keep them. Whereas the last CEO is clearly like, we don't want them around. Or when you call them good or evil, or when you just say, we want to keep the CEO, we want the caring CEO, we don't want the sadistic CEO. That doesn't matter to me if you call them good or evil, or you just say, get rid of the sadistic and keep the caring one. At the end of the day, it's about how you treat people, not what you call them so much, although calling people names can be bad treatment. Does it make clear why I'm uncomfortable with saying all injurious behavior is always ignorance? It's because we use this frame, this difference between ignorance and wanting to evaluate severity of culpability.
Hold on, Nordalian. He said in some in most cases, of course, there are outliers. Not all the evildoers are doing it out of ignorance. There are some, of course, like even in the book, the way he worded it was not always out of ignorance. No, it's like, I just assume, like believe. Do not assume immediately that people do everything because they're evil. No, just imagine there is another way. It's like, again, elephant and giraffe. Like, change your point of view for a second. That one, I actually pay attention for those because I remember you're very particular about the wording. If somebody is saying a general definite statement, that's not accurate. Like, there is nothing that is 100% definite. In case of CEOs, there is always a very proper metric to measure the effects of your action, the amount of patients dying, your intention. And ignorance in case of CEOs is actually really, really bad. Like, it's ignorant CEOs, like that should be avoided actually. My problem was where people would use the logic of 2 + 2 = 4 and others and not 7. Like, they use this logic to apply to everything. If they feel bad, 2 + 2 is not 7, it's 4, let me prove them wrong. They would like just conflating feelings with actual facts. Like, this is my problem, because feelings of one person, they are not bigger than feelings of the other person. And punishing a person because only you felt hurt, but the other person's like completely oblivious to everything, that's a way different thing, because this is a not mathematical fact. When one person's feelings get triggered and the person acts on that, this is not a mathematical fact. It's very difficult to prove, and basically very difficult to make another person to understand. Like in case of child and family secret, the child was like, I'm not even aware what family secrets are. Like, but you heard me many times saying family secrets are valuable, but I did not know even that was the family secret. That was the family secret. I did not know. Well, now you got punished. I was like, and the child, even after punishment, like, well, what did I get punished for? I still for family secrets, but I still don't understand which one of my actions were the family secrets. And then later on, when the parents like, this is where the family secrets, like, I didn't deserve that my bishop was saying that. That was like such a small, like unimportant thing. Just saying to a person, you will get punished for family secrets, and punishing them for spilling out the beans for family secrets doesn't mean the child will be aware which were of the sentences the child said were the family secrets. And the reason is because the parent did not explain correctly what are the family secrets are to a child. The child was still unaware. I mean, and that, in my opinion, is like not a correct use of force. That was kind of even called preventive, still misguided very much, because the consequences like definitely counterintuitive to the lesson that the parent was trying to teach a child.
I don't think that's, and maybe I'm misreading the situation, but I don't think that's what Nerdalian's trying to point at. So I'm going to try to reframe it and give me some feedback if I have it right. Because I think Nerdalian's point is like, we have this intuition that we want to make these distinctions between these different levels of culpability. And that matters because that leads to like tangible differences in how we treat the situation to hopefully resolve it, right? Is that okay? Okay, so if that's the framing, I think I also give me feedback if I'm wrong with this. I think another concern is that what Rosenberg's framework might allow someone to do is this move where we say, well, yeah, I know that the psychopathic CEO who like which wants to actively maximize the harm this drug does and wants to kill as many people as possible. Like, yeah, I know he like, you know, he's doing like he's actively like trying to push this drug and cut these, you know, regulation shortcuts to make that happen. But he's actually ignorant about what he really needs. And that like, you know, so because he's actually like technically ignorant about this other thing, we need to move him into this different category of culpability. And so we can't really dish out the same kind of we cannot treat them the same. We cannot intervene the same way we'd want to intervene with like the guy who's like willfully, you know, negligent, or the guy who just had no idea and thought he did all the right things. Is that, am I getting the concern right, Medallion? Or is...
So I'm feeling a little bit lost because you sort of summarized a bit of what I said, and then you summarized a bit of what you think Rosenberg's version is, or were you summarizing what you think I think Rosenberg's version is? So my reading is getting a little complicated.
Yeah, sorry. So the first part was me trying to summarize, I think, your framing of like we want these different levels of culpability, different ways to treat different cases, and that if I understand your concern right, it's that Rosenberg's framework might let someone treat this third category of like psychopath, no, get rid of that, and treat that as like the second category of like, well, he was just kind of like, or maybe even the first category, like he was actually just ignorant. He just didn't really know. So we can't have this third category of like treating them in this specific way, which maybe causes like for much more direct intervention.
Yeah, I'm concerned by that. I suspect that Rosenberg would want something like that, although he'd probably say for protective reasons it makes sense to get rid of the psychopathic CEO. But I've heard at least one other person sort of explicitly defend this thing. I'm worried that kind of that was a person that was a Buddhist person using the Buddhist denial of the existence of evil to basically say the psychopathic CEO is the same as the first CEO that cares and is trying to do as much good as they can.
Yeah, I think, okay, so I think, so then I think I do get what you're saying. And I think so, and I agree with these two, actually. I think Rosenberg wouldn't want to do that conflation of like, because he's going to be practical. It's just, because it kind of reminds me of certain characterizations of certain parts of Aristotle's ethics of like, the law isn't meant to be like, you know, moralizing and like you're, you know, intrinsically a bad person. It's like, no, you're just like, you cannot function in the rules we have set out for society, and like we literally just have to separate you from like the rest of society because you're just going to actually cause all this harm, and like there's no way to rehabilitate you as far as we can like figure out. So like we just have this practical, like another personal, man, I just gotta like take you out of this group, and like you go sit in timeout, and like little kids play together. Like I'm not trying to like say you're a bad person intrinsically, and you know, it's like I just can't do anything about it. So just gotta. So I think that's, at least my hopefully charitable reading of Rosenberg's approach is like that's what he would want, is something like that, where like it's not personal. I'm not like, oh, you're like intrinsically like sinful and like eternally like damned or forsaken. He's like, no, he's trying to actually just put that off the table as much as he can, I guess, in such a limited medium as text.
Yeah, the evil CO definitely should be removed. Like totally exists. It's, absolutely. Guys, would you like to add before I read comments? Yeah, Ram?
Yeah, no, I definitely would like to. I was going to say one thing we have to keep in mind: if we're going to fire the psychopath CEO, we're going to hurt his feelings. And as far as I appreciate Nordalian breaking it down.
Also, you're gonna financially harm
the CEO's cause.
You're gonna financially harm the CEO. How dare you? It's monstrous.
That's a necessary use of force, though.
No,
That's
I was going to say you're breaking down the CEO's. Yeah, exactly. You're just going to hurt that psychopath. But I was going to say you're breaking it down into these categories. They're causing harm, they're ignorant, all that. When you're not giving me the proper metric to decide if it's a good or bad CEO, which is how much have they increased stockholder value. How much harm they're doing is irrelevant to whether they're a good or bad CEO. It's how much they add to stockholder value. That's what's critical. Tagging up.
So what you're saying is the real mistake of the CEO was letting it become known by the public that his actions killed a bunch of patients and thereby losing market for the company. Market share.
But if you kill a bunch of
indifferent.
If you only kill some patients, but most patients you don't kill, and you make a big profit, and you can pay off all the lawsuits, or you have an exemption from the governments, then you're still psychopathic. And we don't have any levers to remove you, so it's kind of pointless to have this discussion. Bad CEOs should be. I'm against.
You should start
bad
reading
CEOs
the comments before we start talking about vaccines.
Come on, don't use that word. Come on, you guys know.
Oh, now we're demonetized. God, you can't
I'm
talk
not even
about that
monetizing
elephant.
that video. Like last one got me the whole total of 4 cents, and out of that I pay 30% taxes.
Lost that income stream.
That word. Okay, guys, there is excellent comments here. We have Peter in the room and Sigma and Upcycle Club. So Peter, how to talk okay, that's a book. How to talk to kids so they will listen, and listen so kids will talk. The best book ever. I will check it out. Thank you for advising it. And yeah, then another one. The most effective way is probably to change someone's environment, but that in most cases is hard because of investment. In terms of, for example, offspring, change is also affect parents and some. Okay, so it was in referring to obesity conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then Sigma, ignorance, willful disregard, stupidity, lacking awareness, or unforeseen. Yeah, stupidity goes hand in hand with willful ignorance. Okay, Upcycle Club. There is an old idiom in an ancient Greek. I can't read that. It roughly translates into English. You should not air your family's dirty laundry in public.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, true.
Is it okay to air it inside Plato's cave?
Probably not.
Okay.
Depends who's in the cave.
With Sigma, and how the cave smells. Remember about that dimension. Sigma says a way of distinguishing psychopathy and altruism is the size of the space and time considered. The scope of environment, small as individual or large as community. Yeah.
Not quite understanding the point.
It's how do we distinguish between psychopathy and altruism? I never thought about those two together. Shame in love with Debbie. Congratulations. It's very good to be in love. Okay. Excellent. You guys want to comment on comments?
I have a meta comment of like, am I supposed to be like paying attention to this stuff? Because I didn't, like, I'm just now opening the live stream. Was I supposed to be doing that? Like, is that?
You
No,
don't
okay.
have to. You
'cause now
don't have to.
I only did it because someone mentioned there was like a Greek phrase. I'm trying to teach myself Greek so I can read old text.
Mhm.
So I was like, oh, maybe I can read. I probably can't read the words, but I was like, maybe I can try.
I used to pay attention. I found it a little distracting, and Kara does a really good job of keeping an eye and involving the audience as well. So kind of don't feel pressure to keep an eye on that.
Well, I guess an actual response, which I can't. The Windows frozen. But was the point the person like with the whole like the scale, or they're just trying to bring attention? I think possibly to the scale of like, or you're looking at like immediate, long term, like from harm to myself, from harm to like my immediate, loved ones to like my whole community. Like maybe that's the thing they're trying to bring attention to, which is I think useful in any kind of discussion that leads towards like ethics and morality and what one should do and all that good jazz.
What was the claim that was made about the scale?
I think they used the word
Scale.
space, but it was a little
Scale.
difficult for me to understand the word space. But I also kind of assumed they were talking about sometimes it's called circles, like the circle of empathy expanding, like how many people are taken into consideration, like how many people's needs are being taken into consideration. Are you only taking into consideration your own need, or does that extend to the family and colleagues, or does it extend to whole communities or whatever? Like how many people's needs are you considering? I think that's the point they were making.
And pure altruism is the most encompassing, and pure psychopathy is the least encompassing. Is that the point there?
I think that's what they're saying, yeah. The person in the comments. They're free to correct us if we've misunderstood.
There you go. If only there were
Sigma.
an easier way.
Guys, use they as general comments.
They as comments. There you go. You get the pronouns right that way. Fair enough.
Been identified as they, but
They, the commenters.
yes. Okay.
Perfectly
I
good
mean,
pronoun.
yeah, the commenters is a very good. Okay. Types of punitive force. So there are 3 types of punitive force that Marshall names in his book. It's physical punishment. I had to give a special shout out to spanking. Verbal punishment.
What?
And withholding.
Is this an endorsement?
Spanking is a kind of punishment that some people willingly give each other the right to do.
Yes, so like it was funny how he actually Rosenberg like, physical punishment, spanking. I was like, that doesn't sound like punishment. Okay, then verbal punishment, and the third one, withholding means of gratification and privileges. Okay, so and then there is like the negative side of physical punishment. and also other ways. I think it's applicable to verbal as well. It teaches children that when all else fails, we can always resort to physical violence. Fear of corporate punishment may obscure children's awareness of the compassion that underlines parental demise. And I guess in this case, the children will only see the action itself, will not understand the needs of the parent that parent are expressing. And then awareness of the compassion, yes. And in the process of perpetuating a social norm that justifies violence as a means of resolving differences. Okay, so gives a child incorrect worldview where violence is the means to solve a problem. Verbal punishment, I mean, and by verbal punishment, it's all words, forms of blaming, scolding, name calling, but also reputation as well. It's actually verbally describing a person in diminishing terms. And the last one, withholding means of gratification and withdrawal of care is the worst of them. Withdrawal of care and respect. Okay, that's a lot of kind of to unpack in here. Algernon, you go first.
Okay. Just going through some of those, maybe I have this contrarian view that just has to be exercised. But when I see that he's like, don't use punitive force. Here are some examples of punitive force. Physical punishment. I'm like, oh yeah, there's some cases where that's actually entirely called for and appropriate. Verbal punishment. Oh yeah, there's actually a whole bunch of verbal punishments that I think are entirely appropriate and, you know, could be painful to the person here, but constructive if held in the right intention and right outer framework. Straw mans where you just go, oh yeah, just don't, like, you know, just call them names. You're like, agreed. But to just put a category that says verbal punishment and leave it vague, you can see exceptions to every one of these. And then withholding means of gratification privileges, again, carrot stick thing. And then withdrawal of care, I agree wholeheartedly. However, to combine that with or respect throws out an immense lever that I think is entirely reasonable to use. Like you could have a conversation with, to use child again here, where you're like, suppose the kid beats up on another kid or treats them very roughly on the playground. And you talk to the kid and you're like, you know, look, I want, like, you can defend somebody else and I would have respect for that. But to see you just beat up on another kid for what you did, like I watched the whole thing and it wasn't appropriate. And that makes me lose respect for you. And I want to have respect for you. But watching you do that, you know, like, so you're threatening the loss of respect for the kid. And I think that's appropriate. I think holding that as a high ideal of wanting to be able to hold someone else's respect, that's a valuable lesson. So just to throw it in here with the or is, you know, I'm sure Rosenberg and all of his other lessons and teachings would counter this, and Kevin will tell us all about it.
Should I do that now or later? I mean, yeah, it's because again, it's like he's not like, because I think at least in that chapter, right, he does mention the principal who, you know, is like trying to intervene in some bully, or like it's like a friend of his who happens to be principal, and they're, I guess, at the school grounds. You see some like kid outside being up on a little kid, and you know, intervenes in a way that where he's like, I'll teach you, you know, like, you know, this is like what happens. Like he smacks the kid over, and obviously that's not what Algernon is getting at, right? It'd be like not that intervention, which he was like, I don't think he taught the kid, you know, to not, you know, use violence. I think you just told him not to do that whenever like someone who's bigger than him, like a principal, might see, which, right, I think is probably a reasonable thing to be concerned about. Yeah, I mean, like the thing is, Algernon, I don't think like and maybe I'm misunderstanding your understanding, but like I don't think you're like getting what he means by punishment, because it's always this kind of intentional headspace where I think like all the qualifications that you end up wanting to make, I think he allows for it. It's just like in this really unintuitive way of using the word punishment, because it's like with this idea of punishment comes this entire worldview, which is entirely moralizing and like judgmental. He doesn't mean judgments, as Graham pointed out in the previous discussion, of like as in like, oh, I make an observation, right? It's like, no, he means judgment in the sense of like I'm condemning you, right, as saved or not saved kind of thing. So he's just like really trying to like just shift away from that. And I think, at least personally, I think the way he's doing it is probably ineffective for people like us, right? Just because the language is, we're gonna nitpick stuff, and I do that all the time. And so in some sense, me railing against, I think the general responses you'll have is me railing against myself. But I just can't do that. I can't both express and then contradict at the same time. So thank you for voicing what I would already want to do naturally. Tag out.
Yeah, I was going to sit there and agree with Algernon, where it's like, to me, putting in denying somebody food and saying the fact that you stole that from the store, I lost respect for you, into the same category, just that's two different levels of offense. I think at the very least, the loss of respect should be placed in like the second, more of a verbal category. Just sort of my thought is to make it a little more consistent and a little more palatable to, the idea that not denying food or care is just unforgivable. You just never do that. Tagging.
Oh, your kids are going to be so fat though, Graham. Never denying food.
I wanted to defend myself of the charge of autism and say, while I'm open to the possibility that I'm on the spectrum, I've been told that by many people, mostly people who are angry at me, and not mostly people who would caringly try to figure out how to tend my mental health needs. So another possibility, which is also within the realm of possibilities of that I may be one of the people that's just too autistic to understand Rosenberg, is that Rosenberg isn't a great writer. And so these these types of punitive force would have made total sense if you just left out the word punitive as a type of force, because they can be either punitive or protective, any of those types. And so he just did not, if he left that one word out, it would have been clear that like the kind of force in terms of, is it physical, is it verbal, is it passive aggressive, is it active aggressive, that's a different way to classify types of force. And an orthogonal classification system is the punitive versus protective, which depends on your intention rather than the kind of act you're taking. And then you could have a little grid where you have physical force that's punitive and physical force that's protective, and you can have verbal force that's verbal punishment that's punitive and verbal punishment that's, he just did not make that clear, but I think that's probably how he thinks about it. He just did not put that in writing.
I was going to say, I think we can say that Rosenberg is a psychologist and not a mathematician. Tag.
He's definitely not a mathematician, but I think you don't even have to be a mathematician to just organize your thoughts clearly.
I mean, I definitely have a problem with organizing my thoughts clearly. I very creative.
But before you write a book.
I mean, yeah, you're right. You're right.
Right? So anyway, I mean, I don't disagree with the chapter. I just, as like a guide, it seems wanting to me because there's a lot of fuzzy stuff going on. But the general idea of like, trying to utilize other perspectives and engage in conversation and all those aspects are genuinely good things to do.
Yep. I do actually think about withholding care, respect is a powerful tool.
disagree.
And now I'm actually like was remembering some of previous conversation about physical scars or emotional scars, which are worse, and as punishment, let's say. And I disagree with it's worst of all. Kind of. I do still believe that physical punishment is the worst one. But I think it
would
might be a
disagree.
matter of interpretation. Yeah.
I would disagree because first of all, the framing of which of those is worse is not a super useful dialogical conversation, I think. But if we're gonna do it, like the physical is most likely, I mean, I could rip an arm off, that would counter what I'm about to say. But like it's more likely to be like a more narrow time span. Like you can't presently feel a spanking, to use that example. And no, I don't support that. But the psychological damage that can be done to a kid and then leave them in a state of amplifying that and living in whatever thing that you're, a parent or parents or a family situation might be amplifying over the course of years is going to shape that individual. Is going to change their entire perception of reality and who they are and who they think of themselves and so forth. And that is profound impact upon the individual. So, getting slapped, the physical harm is going to be bad, but completely shifting your identity and your relationship to reality, pretty significant. So I'm going to generally say that emotional manipulation and damage can be far greater. And probably, like, if you were to weigh it out in the world, you'd be like, oh my God, look at all this damage being done to people.
Can I very briefly propose that perhaps something like severity of punishment can be a third orthogonal line across which things can be evaluated?
Both of those. Yeah.
So you can have punitive physical punishment that's very mild, or physical punitive punishment that's very severe, or you can have protective withholding of care that's extremely severe or that's mild. And so like mild and severe in terms of how painful or harmful the punishment is. It's just separate from which category it is. Because like you can hurt someone's feelings and they can feel sad for a weekend, and that's very hurtful. Or you can break someone's neck and leave them paralyzed for the rest of their life, which, so you can have very mild emotional inflictions. You can have very severe physical inflictions. It's like not dependent on whether it's physical or emotional, or how severe or how mild it is.
And to compare them in a way asks the question of, should I avoid one and use the other, or is one okay, or is one more okay than the other? And none of those strike me as really useful things, like looking at the thing itself and the scale of it and the context of it. All of those things are far more important than comparing physical to emotional. Sorry, Kara.
It's okay. I was just about to read comments.
Okay.
So, Shani, I think the point about respect is valid, but also your kids' friendship can be had. I would totally go for kids' friendship. My dad would have pizza night. Nice. And then Upcycle Club. World Autism Awareness Day was 20 days ago. The light blue heart.
I got several DMs, angry DMs.
The light blue heart emoji is also about raising awareness about autism. Thank you. I did not know that. That's a new information.
It'd be an interesting discussion to have. Just what do we think it is? I bet we get 5 different definitions in this room if we started without a written one.
Like each time I don't understand something, I'm like, am I autistic? Can I just like say that? Can I just throw that around?
Now that it's understood to be a spectrum, the answer is yes. We're all on the autism spectrum.
Like,
the most people are at 0, right? So I do want to maybe, I don't know, should we let the rest of the comments be read? Okay. Yeah, I guess So, damn it, what was the previous point of like thread between Algernon and Nerdalian? Someone give me like a quick synopsis.
Severity.
Oh yeah, that's right. Okay, so to another dimension that one might add, which makes it more complicated, is like how does the person identify, which goes to Algernon brought up like the whole like life experience and how that shapes their identity and how they relate to the world and like the way they see things. It's like that might shift across time and have them completely reevaluate what that experience is about. And I bring this up because there was a really interesting interview that Lex Friedman gave with, I think, what was her name, like Ayla or Ella? But she was
Ayala.
Ayala. Thank you. Okay, cool.
Yes.
I knew someone would know.
Both.
And she described this experience of like having grown up and like something that she didn't recognize is like a very controlling kind of maybe you want to use the word oppressive or like very dogmatic, very like strict environment. But like because that was the world she lived in, there was like that wasn't actually an issue until like later in life she like had understood how other people had grown up, the experiences they had, and was like, oh wait, that was traumatic, and had this like weird moment where she like retroactively reevaluated all that as like those are all like really bad things, and actually I got to know someone who like went through that same kind of experience, and it's like I don't know what you do with that, like how that, because these categories don't play nicely with like people's experience of the world, because it's like so what, because this is like a thing I had a conversation with another friend about, like, well, what makes something traumatic is like is it part of how the person like perceives it? Because if they don't have a framing of that being like a really big issue or being like it's like how does one make sense of that? And I'm not sure, and this goes to this problem of pain as well, that a different friend, he's into sports exercise science stuff, and he finds it continually baffling, just the whole concept of pain and like how we process that, and like what is a stimulus like something you want to move away from or towards, and how do you interpret it? Because like if you, I'm stealing this example from somewhere else, I can't remember, but like if you wake up in the middle of the night and if you're experiencing like the phenomenon that you experience whenever you're like deadlifting and like you're going to fail, it's like if you wake up in the middle of the night having that sensation, it's like a medical emergency. But if you're in a gym and like the whole context is like I know what I'm getting myself into and I'm anticipating this experience, like, well, that's a positive thing, and that's like what you're trying to go for and part of this self-development and growth process. But like it's just like, and part of him, he's also like a fitness trainer, I guess, and like builds people's like personal like regimens and workout programs. And so he's like very mindful. He's like studied a lot about psychology, just incidentally, to be better at his job, to like just the wording he has to use of like I have to like avoid certain terms and frame it in other ways, because if I don't frame it that way, they'll expect a kind of injury that would actually make the injury more likely, because their expectation and how they're like engaging the world. So I don't, this is just another dimension of like human experience that obviously breaks these categories, and maybe they're not so helpful, but yeah, end of rant.
No, I was going to build off of sort of similar ideas and some of what Algernon was talking about. And he was drawing attention to what I see as the internal versus external source of the pain and problem for the person. And it's like in physical pain, that's always connected to the external source. Is your foot in the fire? Is the nail through your foot? You have the external source. But when you're dealing with that emotional sort of changing of the worldview, that's that's like an internal pain, and that sort of works with the idea of it's the interaction between the external raw input data and your internal processor that produces whether or not something is pain, whether or not it's emotionally damaging and all. So it's right at the interface of the external internal is where the rubber meets the road, and it's neither of them independent of the other one. It's when the two sort of nature and nurture, when they meet, is when everything happens. Tagging out on that.
Before we move to the last slide, Would you guys like to address a little bit more about the types of punitive force? I noted the word punity might be removed, and we can use the types of force, then add to it the severity of the force as well. Am I missing something? It's a good proposal. The mathematician mind. Okay.
We're gonna
Sorry,
need
there's one
n-dimensional
quick thing
space.
about. I think there's
Yeah.
something that I should remember. That there's an entire like different, which someone brought this up earlier. I forgot who it was, but there's this idea of like punitive like justice versus restorative justice,
Mhm.
and that like that's an alternative model to this, which I think Rosenberg would be sympathetic towards. Which is something maybe people can just look into if that's of interest. But it's like a quick example is that like if someone's broke someone's hands, it's like the way you'd resolve that is different depending on like are they a professional pianist who spend their entire lives using their hands, and like it's that like what is the injury to them in their given context, and that would be treated very differently than if like a young kid and like it's like they haven't done anything with their hands yet, and like and it's actually not going to like cripple them in a very significant way. They might be able to recover from it, but restorative justice just tries taking the context, but it's also much, I think, more difficult, at least from my understanding of it, to implement logistically, because like how do you don't have this consistent set of like, well, if they do X, then I have here are the boundaries for like what we can do in response to this. It's always a case by case basis, and that makes it, I think, difficult for technical reasons to implement. But that's something interesting to maybe bring up and for people to look into if they care about that.
Yeah, I'd like to make a quick comment on that, and it relates to Rosenberg saying punitive force is based on certain kinds of assumptions, and like I'm sure in some cases that's exactly the kind of assumptions that's guiding it, but like people are complicated and they act for different reasons, and so there are all these different specialized types of justice. And so the one that came up now was restorative justice, and it's sometimes contrasted with retributive justice. So retributive justice is this kind of making someone suffer out of a like sense of vengeance. I'm oversimplifying it, but that's roughly the idea. And retributive is sort of healing the damage that's been done, so finding ways to just repair and build going forward rather than sort of harming to equalize harms. But there are other like dimensions across which different kinds of justice are compared. So there's the distinction between distributive justice and procedural justice that also came to mind. I guess there might be some more that I'm forgetting. But yeah, so someone feeling justified in using force could be based on several different frameworks for what justice even means and how justice is acted in the world. And it may cause different kinds of harm, different kinds of pain. And in general, this stuff is actually like really complicated, and writing a really short book is going to be hard to do justice to the subject, because individuals have several needs that don't just have one need, and those needs can be weighed off against each other, and the needs are hierarchically organized in different ways, and their needs change over time. So it's like dynamic over time as well. And even if it didn't change like at different time points, they would like reality changes even if the needs stay constant. And there are different people, and those people are organized into different units, and the units can be analyzed as having a need. So like a family unit can be considered to have a needs as family that's different from the individuals of the family. A business can have needs that's different from the individuals that make up the business. And to try to navigate all those different needs and say, well, let's just try to have compassion for everybody's needs, try to meet them, is just an intractable problem. And partly why I think social animals evolved emotions to begin with. Like emotions are like shortcuts for navigating that maze, like your heuristics that help animals make quick judgments. And it's from that sort of need of navigating this impossibly complicated set of social needs that all mammals evolved anger. And to just say, well, anger is not a good mode of being, compassion is a better mode of being. Like mammals evolved both compassion and anger. And to say, well, my religion endorses compassion, and it says less anger, thanks, is not something I can get on board with.
And I think that's the That's the choice thing that is applicable here. There are people who can group themselves, let's say, in accordance to their compatible needs. It's different in case of family and children. Let's say, like, we have to stick together. But in case of people who can choose, there are different societies built. Like, some are more compassionate and the other ones are more like straightforward, let's say, eye for an eye sort of thing. And like evolutionary, who survived? Are there like those who eye for an eye or more compassionate? It's like, I think all of them exist still, the different tribes with different actions. Like, we got a little bit more civilized over the last 400 years, but we are basically still kind of primitive. Yes. Okay. Then the final part is the cost of punishment. When we fear punishment, we focus on consequences, not on our own values and needs. Fear of punishment diminishes self-esteem and goodwill. The more we are seen as agent of punishment to others, the harder it is for others to respond compassionately to our needs. And then Marshall B. Rosenberg offers an exercise, but I would like you guys to weigh in onto the cost of punishment. Nordalian.
I think Rosenberg's right, because it's maybe a probabilistic thing, so maybe not a sure causal thing, because like maybe sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Right? Maybe at least in the majority of cases, punishing people will make it more difficult for them to act compassionately towards one. There are many schools of thought, like cynical schools of thought, that say it's naive to expect compassionate treatment from people who aren't your immediate clan. Like, you can expect compassionate treatment from your clan for people in different tribes in the same nation, or definitely in different nations. It's silly to expect compassion from them. So whether you punish them or whether you don't punish them, you're not going to get compassion. And certainly, like, whether you take that sort of stance that like the whole world is like that, with some people, yeah, like, compassion is just not going to happen. You're still not going to get compassion from them. And so at some point, kind of like, yeah, if I'm punishing them, it's even less likely, but like the chances that I was going to get compassion from them is already negligible. So I might as well stand up for myself and send a message to others while doing so.
Algernon? Is it too broad?
I'll focus narrowly. So let's look at the one up. Fear of punishment diminishes self-esteem and goodwill. So breaking that into two, fear of punishment diminishes self-esteem, and then fear of punishment diminishes goodwill. I completely agree with the latter, the goodwill. Like, if the person's response is punishment and you shape yourself to resist the punishment, to avoid the punishment, and then you're really kind of ignoring the objective, why the punishment was put in, which is his first point. So I agree with that part, but not sure that I quite see the connection on the self-esteem one. Like, that seems to convolute several things. Like, I'm not sure that one's fear of punishment is going to diminish your own self-esteem. Like, you could fear the punishment. How does that connect to the self-esteem? I'm not clear on that.
I think I
And
can
then-
explain what
Okay.
Rosenberg might say there. I think he meant to say something like, and so the self-esteem and the first point about fear of punishment is about how the fear directs attention to the consequences that might harm the self.
Mhm.
And it takes attention away from this kind of giraffe mindset of I have values and needs and I compassionately care about the values of needs and others, and sort of acting from this secure sense of self and one's own values and a real care for the values of others, and sort of acting compassionately with compassion towards oneself and others. And it induces this mindset of not compassion but fear, and the fear is that I may be punished, and especially if the punishment is of the kind where it's verbal punishment about shame and blame, it may be fear of not being good enough, or even fear of physical punishment. That fear of physical punishment, or fear of verbal punishment, or fear of withholding from care is not the same as a compassionate self-acceptance. So I think by self-esteem, he means something like this: self-respect, self-compassion. And yeah, if you're scared for your life, that's not a state of self-compassion. That's a state of fear. There are different mental states to be in. But I'm kind of with you that link seems. There seems to be some conceptual work that needs to be done to link them, and they don't causally seem to necessarily be linked. I think what a person with decent self-esteem can have fear of a specific punishment in a specific narrow context without that affecting their self-esteem severely.
Yeah.
I think the scenario that Rosenberg has in mind is when a person's modus operandi begins to be dominated by acting in ways out of fear of punishment.
Yeah, like when the punishment starts to shape you, and you start to have, like, say, beliefs that you deserve the punishment, or the punishment might be appropriate and I'm a bad person, or all the things that can come from that. I agree that is going to be directly eroding one's self-esteem. But the fear itself, I don't know. I probably can lead there. Maybe it's just steps in the chain. And I'll tag out to Graham.
I totally know about fear of punishment, but yeah, Graham.
I was going to say where I'm going to want to put input is on the receiving end. I think it's hard for a lot of people to distinguish between consequence of one's action and punishment for that action. And if they're making that mistake, they're going to also mistake, compassion that somebody's showing for something that's, you're dealing with the consequence of your action, as opposed to that person is punishing them. And I just see this as, I'm not sure how Rosenberg would disentangle this sort of miscommunication. It just seems kind of inherent with the way that people tend to feel negative consequence or negative feedback. Going to tag on that.
I think actually this is an idea I got from y'all working through that, because actually I was also like thinking, like, what the hell does he mean? Because my browser froze, so I don't have access to the book at the moment. But I was like, what the hell is he talking about when he says, like, fear of punishment diminishes self-esteem? And one thing that came up as a possibility is, again, like he mentioned something in one of these workshops where he talks about the trial of Eichmann post World War II from Nazi Germany, and has a real concern about the how certain, like, how mindset of obedience to a power structure, whether that be like religious or political or bureaucratic, it's like how that kind of can facilitate anyone to become a Nazi. That, like, you can just become okay with it. Because he actually, I think, gives one of the reasons that Eichmann gave about, like, well, one of the justifications was, like, because people asked him, like, was it easy to send those people to death? And he's like, well, yeah, it was, because we had entire language around, like, I'm just following orders, right? And it's like, it's not, I'm not really, responsible here. And I can kind of see, this is, I think, is a stretch though, of like how, like, he's like, what he might mean by self-esteem in that context is like your own sense of like being in touch with like your intrinsic motivations and values can be like undermined. And in that sense, it's like that this fear of punishment is you actually shifting into this headspace of like, I must be obedient to this external right? A structure that's imposing its rules upon me. And that is actually undermining your sense of, like, I would call it like maybe like agency or like personal ethic, whatever you, that's how I'd frame it. But like maybe he's referring to that, possibly. I don't know. That's a giant stab in the dark for me. Tag out.
Just to address a little bit the question, fear of punishment versus self-esteem. Talking about a child who is afraid of punishment, feels small and helpless. And each time the child does something and he gets punished, and not always understanding, but he gets punished and he thinks, oh, I've done something wrong. He doesn't understand what wrong he has done, but he still gets punished. So the parents are always correct, must be, I've done something wrong. And it keeps lowering their self-esteem. That the children who constantly get punished verbally, physically, withholding care, if a parent let's say convinces that child that that you're bad, and the child will keep acting not out of goodwill but out of fear of punishment, it does like I do see them in the same line. It's not out of goodwill, but because you're bad, and if you don't act good, you will get punished. You do something because you're bad, and if you're bad, and you will be punished. It's connected in a child's mind. And this I see, like children who are being punished, if they do not understand why they're punished, they will think because they trust the person, or either they will mistrust the person completely, or they will think they are bad because they trust the person who punishes them. So that's how I understood it. What do you think, Algernon?
So I don't disagree with that point, but a couple of times you bring in an added complexity into it so in the case of the added complexity, I completely agree with you, but I don't think that added complexity is involved all the time. The added complexity to which I'm referring is when the person who's applying the punishment is doing so unjustly. For example, like the kid didn't know what the family secret was or didn't understand the concept, and now they're being punished for it. Plenty of other examples where the kid could be like, if you do this, if you leave your bike in the yard one more time, I'm going to take it away for a week. That's the punishment. And the kid's like, yeah, no, all right, fine. And then, they leave it in the front yard. You're like, I'm taking the bike away. There's the punishment. In an unreasonable world where you're like full of just random punishments and you don't even know what the hell is going on, and they're being applied capriciously, etc. Straw man argument. Yeah, of course. Totally wrecking the kid's self-esteem. A horrible thing. Don't do that to people. But in the space of like never use punishment at all, like that's, I guess, the other straw man side of the argument.
No,
really
punishment. I mean, to be honest, there was this.
Punish your kids on occasion reasonably.
Let me jump in here real quick.
Yeah.
And that I think the point Algernon's making is what I was trying to make before, and that's that there's a difference between consequence and punishment. When you've explained, it's like dropping a plate for, it's going to break. That's not a punishment. It's just the consequence. And that's what you're trying with telling the kid about the bike in the yard. You're trying to give him a small sort of consequence so he doesn't face a worse consequence later of having like a car stolen or something on him. So it's sort of like, it's people confusing a consequence with an actual punishment, which again here I'm actually going to side with Rosenberg with it's that intentional inflicting of that one where it's not needed. It's not based in the cause and effect reality sort of thing. Gonna tag.
I'm not sure I get your distinction there.
I agree.
It seems like a word game. You're like, I have a punishment, I've put it in place, and it's going to be the consequence if you break this rule. Like the punishment is the consequence of breaking this rule, and it was artificial. I created it because I'm the parent.
But
How is
Mhm.
people don't have a common understanding of, a punishment versus a consequence when a punishment can be the consequence. So maybe you understand it differently, Graham.
No, I understand what Graham says, to teach, so preventive use of force. In here, Graham says preventive use of force. In order for future for a child to learn something, there is a preventive use of force where you will warn a child about the bike. It's the action is pretty clear. It's obvious. So there is a bike, there is a loan. It's very, very easy to prove. Bike loan.
Okay.
Child can understand it. And then you apply a consequence. There are things that a child cannot understand, like the child just doesn't have a concept of it, and then you apply that. It's that's the miss kind of like that. You can use punishment in two ways. One, the child understand that it is a consequence, and like it's very clear, it's a consequence. And the other one, where a child is being punished, and the parent basically, look what you made me do by like punishing a child, and the child is like, and like, is it a consequence? Like, did I made you do? Yes, you made me do it because you're a bad child. Let's say, like these are two different things.
I agree. But they don't clearly define it. For me, there's no
not in that book. Yeah,
those two lines of like one of those is a consequence, the other one is a punishment. I'm like,
real quick.
Kara's hitting the point that I was trying to make. It's basically you're not just telling the kid they're wrong because you're saying they're wrong. You're basically, the kid knew ahead of time that this was going to be wrong, and you're able to point out where they're wrong, not just saying that they're wrong arbitrarily. Tagging.
So, okay, but Graham, I need your help to clarify that. Like, whenever you're using the language of like consequence and punishment, are all punishments consequences, but not all consequences are punishments? Or are these just two not overlapping things for you?
It's more of consequences and punishments. Consequences are more of an overall general effect. Punishments, I'm using Rosenberg, where it requires some intentionality and arbitrariness. It's like if it's rooted in cause and effect. Yeah, because that's what I'm getting from Rosenberg. It's a conscious infliction above and beyond. You're doing it out of anger. There's not that causative reason.
And are you like, whenever you say the punishment, are you also like, at least like my understanding of what he means by it's like, are you also associating with that like an entire worldview of like, there is evil in the world that I must rectify, and like this is part of that, and I'm going to condemn them, or is that like not relevant to this?
That's not relevant at this level. I was going to sit there and say another way to look at it is more of the sense of an overarching concept of discipline, which would contain both the consequence element and the punishment element. And you want to side away from the punishment element in your discipline, because that discipline is a way of educating, because you're giving them the factual reasons of what they need to do in order to learn. That's sort of how I see the structure working at this level.
Okay.
Tag.
Thank you.
I want to jump in with a quick point that, like, the nice bridge with the point of helping the children learn. I think as parents, there are things the parents can do that teach their children important lessons. And not only that, I think there are things parents can do that fairly reliably cause their children to change in terms of the kinds of people they grow up in. And I'm not an expert in developmental psychology, but I know like fairly frustratingly, most of the lever there is controlling which other kids the children spend time with. There's not so much the things the parents say. So at one level, very young age, there are emotional dynamics that has very profound effects on children's emotional development, and later emotional attachment styles and just emotional dynamics in general. But when they reach the age where they're sort of going to school with other children, they speak with the accent of the other children, and they pick up habits from other children much more than they do their parents, despite their parents trying to shape their behaviors in all kinds of ways. But what parents can do is they can take them out of the school and put them into a different school where the kids are behave better, where there's a stronger culture of learning and self-development and self-respect, or maybe take them out of the school and put them in a religious school and they turn out to be a different kind of person. Or take them out of that religious school and put them in a different religious school altogether, and they turn out to be a different person. So there are things that parents can do, and maybe as part of a punishment. Like I know I've been threatened to not be allowed to spend time with specific friends that I wanted to as punishment, and that may actually be an effective intervention to force people to change if it's carried through over a significant period of time. At childhood, adults, most of the time, there's basically nothing you can do to force someone to change.
Ow.
Algernon?
The old dog, new trick problem.
Yeah.
This is the
They can.
like, you know,
See,
just
the
right off
thing
the
is-
old people. You can't.
It's
teach them anything.
so there's a very important distinction here between people absolutely can change, they just almost never do, and
Okay.
you can
I think I can accept that.
almost never force them to change. Like it's
I think
practically
I agree with
impossible
that
to
too.
force them,
Yeah.
but they
Like
can.
the resistance an adult can put up after a lifetime of whatever training is significant if they don't want to change.
Lifetime
get
of
in there.
training. That's a good one.
Yeah, exactly. Like they're training to that point in their life was this, and you're like, yeah, it's going to be tough to change that.
Well,
Mm.
there's also this, and this is just another
Still
element that
doable.
I don't know if Rosenberg brings this into the book, but this whole worldview that I'm trying to like really get inside of, I think. Well, actually, no, he does specifically say at some point in one of these workshops of like someone hired him to like help increase sales. He's like, wait, this whole approach, it's not trying to change people, right? And I'm sure this is gonna like piss off everyone in this call of like, what do you mean it's not gonna change? Like, you know, because yeah, of course. But he's like, I think what he means by this is like he's trying to get like, again, shifting from this, which goes to this whole power over versus power with people, is like, because it's like I want them to stop doing this. It's like, so I want to do the thing that's going to give this effect, and I want to treat them instrumentally, right? Like I want to like push all the right buttons. I don't give a shit about my intentions or like what I need to do to get to work. I just want this person to like stop taking my parking spot or like to whatever. And so he's like, I think just trying to also challenge that instrumental view of human relations and interaction, and yet, you know, because like a lot of the objections, right, we're coming up with about the whole like, well, yeah, sometimes it's effective and sometimes this will, you know, get the kind of outcome you want, and he's going to, I think, want to shift into like, no, like that's entirely the wrong frame. We're focusing on, I think this was brought up early in the conversation about like it's not the consequences, right? It's like that's the whole problem. We're doing this consequentialist thing. I mean, I don't think he'd use that language, but and like he's just like trying to rail against this in a very specific rhetorical way that is, again, I acknowledge, very ineffective for people similar to ourselves.
Shut out, Nerdalin. Okay.
I'll get tested. Let's how about that.
Okay. So I would like to appreciate comments a little bit. We have some action here. So Upcycle Club. From ChatGPT, there are two types of justice. That's to your point, Nerdalian. Distributive, procedural, retributive, and restorative.
I like it. It said there's two types and there was four. That's very GPT.
ChatGPT is known for not being great at basic
Yeah.
arithmetic.
I mean, I read that. It was written for.
It's authentic.
It's guys. It's on
For
me. It's on me.
2023, GPTs can't count. I'm sure next year they'll be like, yeah, we fixed it.
No, it's the way I read it. I try. Sorry, guys. So that again, according to ChatGPT, there are four types of justice: distributive, procedural, retributive, and restorative. Are not mutually exclusive, and they may overlap or complement each other in different contexts. Okay.
That sounds like a massive conversation.
exactly like, yeah, but thank you for pointing that
What
out.
is
by the way.
justice and all of its types? Now
Calm
think
down there,
about
Socrates.
categorizing.
I,
What do you mean by
I
justice, Kara?
what do you mean, ChatGPT? I think some
There you go.
psychological terms can be ratified like self-esteem. Psychological, yeah.
Hmm.
Self-esteem.
If you want it to be an authentic Socratic dialogue, you have to ask her first how the sex life is, and then ask her what she thinks justice is.
What? No,
Don't understand
I mean,
that.
I'm not.
Soc-
It's
Socrates
Feel afraid to
opened
follow up.
Socrates opened a dialogue with one, like a question. So just an old friend, hey, old friend, how you doing? And how's the sex life there? And the guy's like, I'd rather not say. And it goes-
just for the contest, they forced him to kill himself. Silent shout out to Offspring. Nice.
mean
Offspring is a
Socrates?
selfish.
Sorry, who
Oh, you
killed-
must
who
mean
self-
Socrates, right? Yeah, that they
Okay,
forced
yeah, okay.
Socrates to kill himself.
Socrates was infringing upon people's freedom too much, and they just could not wait until he dies. And at his old age, they asked him to drink poison, and he did. Okay.
Socrates was insensitive of people's needs not to be harassed randomly in the marketplace about what justice is.
Yeah. Despite being numerous times warned not to do so. And
That's
then
right. And then there was a punishment.
Consequences, not punishment.
Oh, right.
oh, that one is definitely punishment.
It was probably violent, but he imposed it himself. So
I mean, I think it was unnecessary, but okay.
I
They're
think they would
groups.
kill him if he didn't do it. So it's not exactly like a free will situation.
Guys, hold on. There is more. Upcycle Club, the Offspring song called Self-Esteem, I analyzed in one of the earlier line by lines. You can just look. It's a great conversation
Link
with
in the description.
Ironroot. I can put link in the description.
Shout out to Ironroot, huh?
Shout out to Ironroot. We analyzed the Self-Esteem by Offspring, and yeah, excellent lyrics. Then Introvert.
I would like to do a follow-up comment just because it'll be useful for people maybe. And that is you can use GPT in a Socratic mode. Like it's not just you give it a statement and then it answers it. People think that's all you can do with GPT, but you can actually intentionally tell it like pretend this and then have an interchange that goes back and forth with it. And so something that some people, not myself, came up with was the idea of like using this to put it in a Socratic mode, to ask it to be Socratic. If you just
Ooh.
Google Socratic GPT prompts, you'll find stuff that will set it up for you. And it's actually an interesting exercise. Basically, it starts asking you questions. And then, of course, you have to explore your own reasoning as you go. It's mostly a self-reflective type operation. Like don't expect it to correct your reasoning, but used in that context, it's an interesting way to use GPT right now.
Oh, thank you, Algernon. That's interesting. Socratic thing. So, introvert. Self-esteem can be connected to degree of agency. Someone with high self-esteem will have stronger agency. His intentions will be in line with values, I guess. Yeah, sure. Good self-esteem, self-respect. I like it. Sometimes it's so Bazani. Sometimes it's not the thing that's an issue, but the thing behind the thing. A parent bringing a punishment as a weight consequence to an action is different than a parent losing and punishing out of pure anger or wrath. Yes. It's like I always think of it like about reasons why people do something, the decisions they make. There is nothing on the surface. There is the thing we will explain to ourselves. This is one reason we think it is because we feel okay with it. But underneath, if you will open up that nesting doll, there is another reason. When we will open up that nesting doll, there is another reason and another. for punishment. And even with parents, like parents are not always the best people. Sometimes children get unlucky. So proportionally between action and consequence or punishment in that pejorative sense is part of it too. Okay. And the one more from Peter, children need boundaries, and no element of setting boundaries is to learn children consequences of crossing that boundaries. Yes. Yes, actually, children need to be taught to respect their own boundaries and not to cross boundaries of others. Again, it's a job of good education, parents. And regarding ChatGPT from Upcycle Club, to be honest, I asked it to first read Rosenberg's book and focus on chapter 11 so that its answers would be relevant to this discussion. Oh, wow. Thank you. Yeah.
I wonder if it did that or if it just
You'd have to copy paste the chapter. How many tokens are in the chapter? You can copy paste up to 25,000.
I know it's a short
tokens.
It's a short chapter.
May actually fit it in there. I'm curious now.
You can actually do it in piecemeal too, and it usually does a good enough job of like keeping. I mean, so I'm assuming you're using the web app, right, or there's a mobile version of it now, but like it will keep kind of a sort of memory of that conversation. So you could do it in pieces. It's just somewhat tedious. And
I look forward to the time when you could point it at a book, like especially a book that you've purchased, say, then you have rights to read, where you could say, read this book off my Kindle, and I want to talk to you about it as if you're the author, and you can, fill me in on stuff and read everything that the author ever wrote. These would be fun conversations to have. We're not there yet.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I have some authors I would love to talk to.
Keep in mind, you won't really be talking to the author.
Yeah, this chapter is less than 3,000 words. You could totally copy the whole chapter into ChatGPT.
Yeah, in this case, this is a short chapter, it's like 6 pages or so. So it could really explore it. But if honestly, you could interpolate between a whole lot of stuff. It's going to have to infer, and you got to get it to watch all the videos.
But you can actually also copy 2 or 3 entire Viveki lectures and ask it to summarize it for you.
Oh man, when we can send it at the whole series and just say, look, go watch The Awakening from the Antichrist 52 episodes and give me a nice concise summary.
Oh my God.
Which will probably be like 7 hours, but still.
Better than 51. Yeah.
Concise
could
summary.
Be worth it.
Actually, you can just ask it for a summary and it'll tell you about Viveki's work. I've done that. You can ask it to criticize his work. It does pretty even-handed job of saying this is what he contributed and these are the limitations of his work.
Wow. It's a useful tool.
Sorry, off the topic. Like we can move. I'm sorry, Carl.
Fascinating. No, I'm learning here a lot. Again, also, if you guys gonna copy the chapter, I think there was that entire conversation with student can be dropped. It's like basically too concise. I mean, like
on that conversation.
We can do it a little bit. Like I want to finish this last slide. We had been on it for almost 3 hours. It's like one of my longest nonviolent communication live streams because it goes so well. Excellent job, guys. Thank you so much. I think Kevin, as a newcomer, brought us some good luck. Thank you, Kevin. It's thanks to you. It's very peaceful today. Usually we are fist fighting by the end.
Man, I had the complete opposite intention. I was going to come in, guns blazing, and we didn't even end with a fist fight. It's like really disappointing. But it's too soon to say. Hopefully we'll get there.
Because of the nature of the chapter, we withheld.
Oh man, that chapter is a trigger definitely for me. Okay, there are 2 questions that reveal the limitations of punishment. And this actually, when I read it, I was like, ouch, oh, wow, yeah. So the first question, what do we want the other person to do instead of whatever the person does right now? What do we actually want the other person to do? And then there is another question after that. What do we want this person's reasons to be doing that thing that we want them to do? So we actually want the other person to want it. And with punishment, we will not make the other person to want it. I mean, that's my take. Unless like somebody really enjoys to inflict pain and stuff, like the CEO, he actually does want the other people to do things out of fear for his might or something.
Yeah. One example I've been wanting to bring up, but sort of hesitant to bring up because I'm not an expert in foreign relations at all, is Switzerland. And one of the ways in which they keep out of fights is by spending enough on military force that the threat of punishment of invasion is severe enough and credible enough that people are just like, it's not worth it. It's like even if you won, it would cost too much to win Switzerland than to justify taking Switzerland. Like, it would cost more than Switzerland's worth. And so Switzerland has big enough teeth, military speaking, to bite people hard enough to make it not worth invading them. And I think similarly with individual punishment, if your reason for punishing someone is because you want them to leave you the hell alone, and you want them to do it because they're afraid that it'll hurt if they don't, then punishment can actually be quite effective for that specific thing. I don't know that there's many other things that punishment's quite good for.
So one thing, I'm just gonna work through this out loud because I don't know where I'm going with this thought. But like, what if someone had this weird view of like, so like to your point, Diane, it's like, so I want them to not fuck with me, right? Either like militarily, individually, whatever scale, and I want the reason to be because they're scared as shit for like they don't like that like I don't like what do you do with that? Like I don't know, because that becomes this weird, I think. And again, I definitely acknowledge I don't know how Rosenberg's frame addresses sociopathy or narcissism, like both locally and like a large scale. But like that just like I don't even know what you do with that, because it's like, what if the reasons they want that person not to do this are like the really things that he's going to say, like, no, you don't really want that. It's like, no, I want them to be scared shitless. I want to induce that fear. I want to have that sense of complete menacing power over this. Like, I don't know what you do with this. So
Kevin,
yeah, I'm just throwing it out there.
Kevin,
to see what,
we agreed that we weren't going to talk about the vaccines.
Wait, one more time? I didn't catch that.
We agreed that we weren't going to talk about the vaccines.
Wait, what?
Oh boy.
And here I was going a different route. I was saying when you're in that situation, you inflict peace on the world. Pax Romana, Pax Britannia, Pax Americana.
Yeah, that is a common justification for imperialism. So people build empires with that. It's more or less what Graham's saying. Like, what do you do with that?
You made a judgment on one of your things you just said, Nordalian, where you had said like it's effective or not. And I don't remember the whole point, but it always strikes me on some of these that we sometimes mistake, like if it's effective, then it's okay. And you're like, there could be a lot of techniques in here that are effective where you're like, yeah, but good people don't do that. But it could be effective.
Well, those techniques are effective if you like live in Mad Max land. And then they're like, I want to be somebody, people will not fuck with me. And then it's just like, it's just that state of it's okay. Yeah, it's very effective and like great. And
so foreign relations more or less is that kind of situation. If you find yourself in a really harsh prison. That may be a similar kind of situation. It's
Mhm.
context dependent.
Punch the biggest one and stuff like
Oh
that.
man.
I was like, yeah, I mean, sure.
That may not
It
be the
is.
best strategy if you're a home viewer.
Yeah, please do not try it at home.
Do not try this.
The opinions expressed in this panel are
Yeah,
not
right.
to be taken as advice.
Please, please, like we actually like
It's
we
like, Jesus. Somebody's
just
in a prison and they're like,
exploring things.
well,
Like,
and yeah.
yeah, and remember, you're not a country.
Yeah. Context.
So what
matter.
Kara's saying is if you're in jail, don't punch the biggest one, punch somebody else instead, I think.
It's a lot of, you might use nonviolent communication.
Oh, you will get punched
the
for
book.
sure.
I'm picturing nonviolent communication in the middle of a prison riot. That's amusing thought.
It's not the time to start it, right?
What
have
is
some
your
background before
need?
that. We need to get out of here.
Oh yeah, that's a good need. That's actually very. Speaking of, we approached 3 hours. It's an interesting, fascinating conversation. I would like to hear more thoughts about it. If you guys, you can stay after party after we finish the live stream. So I would please, would you like to address the questions? What we want another person to person, not the country, person, because with the country is like family a little bit, because like you cannot get rid of the neighbors somehow, like it's stationary. People can move away from other people. A country cannot do that. A country situation is sort of like prison. Like you're geographically preconditioned to have those neighbors. Stout neighbor countries, and it's different with neighbors. Like kind of. I mean, no, country cannot. Like I don't think Switzerland could move away from other countries, so it had to set their boundary like that. Like it was a necessity for them. It was a protective use of force, let's say. But with people, people who can actually, like people who are building social structures, social connections, setting yourself like, if you will hurt me, I will hurt you like back, like 10 times more, might, like, especially if you teach a child to do that, like as a parent, if you teach your child to act like that, you might harm your child's social life badly. Like, of course, everybody will be scared of that child, sure, like, but like the happiness might be impacted by that sort of thing. Okay, now that I threw that bomb, would you guys like to address it? Grandpa.
Yeah, no, that's again, it's almost like Rosenberg is arguing against himself there, because if you're basing your ideas off what you want the other person to do, you're kind of instrumentalizing them in your thoughts. And in general, I want them to do what they think is the best thing to do in the situation, but I don't want that to be hurtful to people. Again, it's so much of this is contingent on stuff. And what was the second question, Kara? Why? Why I want them to do it? It's basic. Yeah, I remember. Sorry. No, basically, I kind of answered that with before, because I want them to basically just, kind of be genuine, be authentic, and have that be the least harmful they can be. I'm going to tag with that.
Thank you, Kevin.
Sorry, I need a reframing. So what are you asking exactly?
So I was asking thoughts on the final 2 questions by Marshall B. Rosenberg. To answer, what would you like another person to do instead of whatever they're doing right now, let's say? And the other one, what would you like the other person to feel, the reasons for doing that thing that you
Feel.
think they should be doing?
Are you asking like what is my perspective on that personally? Like how would I respond to
Yes.
these kinds of questions?
Mhm.
Okay. This is probably gonna be annoying to people, but like I can't give an answer to it because it like context matters a lot. And it's like, so like what did the person do? Right? It's like, are they did they not say hi to me when I walked by and said hi? Like, you know, that's versus like, are they trying to physically assault me and like, you know, physically injure my person and like rob me? Like these are very different things I want them to do. I might be able to give a general answer to the second one of like, probably want them to do the thing that is meeting my need because they would generally want to be the kind of person who meets other people's needs, and in some sense has some enjoyment of that process, which is maybe me. A different way to frame it would be like to kind of promote a pro-social, or maybe one might call it altruistic mindset. But like, what do I want them to do? I have no idea because I don't know what the situation is. But that's probably the best I got. There you go.
Algernon.
I like what the structure that the two sentences provide, which is, you know, supposing you're trying to consider whether or not a punishment, like what the limitations are there. And so one, isolating and saying, okay, what exactly is it that this other person is doing that I just don't want to have happen, and getting clear on that. So that seems like a very good starting point. And then to look at the meta of that, of saying, okay, now I would like the other person to stop. And in the case of the punishment, we're saying, I want them to stop for reasons other than I just say, stop or I will hit you. And so the question that he's asking you to ask yourself is to say, what other motivations, what other framing for this can I come up with that will put, you know, so that that person themselves have motivation that leads to what I identified as the thing I want them to stop doing. And hopefully you're right about the fact that they should stop doing it, etc. I mean, you're kind of imposing your own viewpoint here. But I like the structure of saying, you know, get very clear on what you think the problem is. And then rather than just saying, let's use force to stop it, you know, let's make a rule or whatever, looking deeper than that and saying, what were the motivations? I mean, he doesn't go into there about what the motivations that led to the behavior were, but you could look at what are motivations that would lead them away from the behavior. And so I see this as his way of putting that. What do I want their reasons to be? I see that as understanding their motivational framework and trying to highlight or get them to construct one that their motivations are aligned with the actions that you want them to change. And I'll tag
It's
out.
excellent. Natalia.
Yeah, so for different people in different contexts at different times, I want them to do different things. Although, like honestly, I don't spend that much time thinking about what I want other people to do. When I obsess about what other people do, it's mostly when they're doing stuff I don't want them to do. So if I'm considering any kind of use of force, it's usually to stop them doing something I don't want them to do. They can do lots of any other things, but that boundary that's being crossed, I don't want to have crossed anymore. So yeah, the general things that I quite like people doing is sort of trying to learn and grow together and do that in a way that's hopefully fun and caring. But generally, I try to spend time with people doing that. So that's not with everybody and not all the time, but that's quite a general thing I like doing. People learning together, learning from each other, teaching each other, learning by teaching. Yeah, that's what I like. And the reasons why I want them to do that is hopefully because of a sincere interest in the subject matter that's being learned, a sincere desire to grow, a sincere desire to become better people, and to like sincerely just finding joy in learning and growing, and should be genuinely like a genuine, sincere care. It's what I like people to do. And yeah, punishing people usually doesn't facilitate going in that direction.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming in. It was a fascinating 3-hour conversation, which I did not expect to take that long. Thank you, Kevin, Graham, Algernon, Nerdalian. I will provide the links below. I will add them a little bit later as I edit the video. Check out all the wonderful comments in live chat. It's like, thank you everybody who's there keeping up the conversation. It's actually interesting second line about ChatGPT that is going on and treating it as a child. That's an interesting point. I also liked Algernon's point on treating ChatGPT as your own personal Socrates, who will interview you. It's excellent. That's a good idea too. And yeah, the links, Algernon, Nerdalian and Graham and Rogeria do philosophy live streams, history philosophy live streams every weekend. Please check them out, join if you would like to be in a book club. And as always, Plato's Cave is a big star of all the live streams. Even right now, Ironroot, Agapic Orientation has a legitimately live stream about Plato's Cave.
Right now?
Right now, yes.
Let's all go over
It's
there.
literally like Plato. Like right now, it's just like it's. I think it's on people's mind a lot, and that's what I wanted to say. Thank you so much.